Mr. Humphreys and His Inheritance by M.R. James. About 15 years ago, on a date late in August or early in September, a train drew up at Wilsthorpe, a country station in eastern England. Out of it stepped, with other passengers, a rather tall and reasonably good-looking young man, carrying a handbag and some papers tied up in a packet. He was expecting to be met, one would say, from the way in which he looked about him, and he was, as obviously, expected. The station master ran forward a step or two, and then, seeming to recollect himself, turned and beckoned to a stout and consequential person with a short round beard, who was scanning the train with some appearance of bewilderment. "Mr. Cooper," he called out, "Mr. Cooper, I think this is you gentleman." And then to the passenger who had just alighted, "Mr. Humphreys, sir, glad to bid you welcome to Wilsthorpe. There's a cart from the hall for your luggage, and here's Mr. Cooper, what I think you know." Mr. Cooper had hurried up and now raised his hat and shook hands. "Very pleased, I'm sure," he said, "to give the echo to Mr. Palmer's kind words. I should have been the first to render expression to them, but for the face not being familiar to me, Mr. Humphreys. May your residence among us be marked as a red letter day, sir." "Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper," said Humphreys, "for your good wishes, and Mr. Palmer also. I do hope very much that this change of tenancy, which you must all regret, I'm sure, will not be to the detriment of those with whom I shall be brought into contact." He stopped, feeling that the words were not fitting themselves together in the happiest way, and Mr. Cooper cut in. "Oh, you may rest satisfied of that, Mr. Humphreys. I'll take it upon myself to assure you, sir, that a warm welcome awaits you on all sides. And as to any change of propriety turning out detrimental to the neighbourhood, well, your late uncle—" And here Mr. Cooper also stopped, possibly in obedience to an inner monitor, possibly because Mr. Palmer, clearing his throat loudly, asked Humphreys for his ticket. The two men left the little station and, at Humphrey's suggestion, decided to walk to Mr. Cooper's house, where luncheon was awaiting them. The relation in which these personages stood to each other can be explained in a very few lines. Humphreys had inherited, quite unexpectedly, a property from an uncle. Neither the property nor the uncle had he ever seen. He was alone in the world, a man of good ability and kindly nature, whose employment in a government office for the last 4 or 5 years had not gone far to fit him for the life of a country gentleman. He was studious and rather diffident, and had few out-of-door pursuits except golf and gardening. Today he had come down for the first time to visit Wilsthorpe and confer with Mr. Cooper the bailiff as to the matters which needed immediate attention. It may be asked how this came to be his first visit. Ought he not in decency to have attended his uncle's funeral? The answer is not far to seek. He had been abroad at the time of the death, and his address had not been at once procurable, so he had put off coming to Wilsthorpe till he heard that all things were ready for him. And now we find him arrived at Mr. Cooper's comfortable house, facing the parsonage, and having just shaken hands with the smiling Mrs. and Miss Cooper. During the minutes that preceded the announcement of luncheon, the party settled themselves on elaborate chairs in the drawing-room, Humphreys, for his part, perspiring quietly in the consciousness that stock was being taken of him. "I was just saying to Mr. Humphreys, my dear," said Mr. Cooper, "that I hope and trust that his residence among us here in Wilsthorpe will be marked as a red letter day." "Yes, indeed, I'm sure," said Mrs. Cooper heartily, "and many, many of them." Miss Cooper murmured words to the same effect, and Humphreys attempted a pleasantry about painting the whole calendar red, which, though greeted with shrill laughter, was evidently not fully understood. At this point they proceeded to luncheon. "Do you know this part of the country at all, Mr. Humphreys?" said Mrs. Cooper, after a short interval. This was a better opening. "No, I'm sorry to say I do not," said Humphreys. "It seems very pleasant, what I could see of it coming down in the train." "Oh, it is a pleasant part. Really, I sometimes say I don't know a nicer district for the country. And the people round too, such a quantity always going on. but I'm afraid you've come a little late for some of the better garden parties, Mr. Humphreys." "I suppose I have. Dear me, what a pity," said Humphreys, with a gleam of relief, and then feeling that something more could be got out of this topic. "But after all, you see, Mrs. Cooper, even if I could have been here earlier, I should have been cut off from them, should I not? My poor uncle's recent death, you know." "Oh dear, Mr. Humphreys, to be sure. What a dreadful thing of me to say." And Mr. and Miss Cooper seconded the proposition inarticulately. "What must you have thought? I am sorry. You really must forgive me." "Not at all, Mrs. Cooper, I assure you. I can't honestly assert that my uncle's death was a great grief to me, for I'd never seen him. All I meant was that I supposed I shouldn't be expected to take part for some little time in festivities of that kind." "Now, really, it's very kind of you to take it in that way, Mr. Humphreys, isn't it, George? And you do forgive me. But only fancy, you never saw poor old Mr. Wilson." "Never in my life, nor did I ever have a letter from him. But, by the way, you have something to forgive me for. I've never thanked you, except by letter, for all the trouble you've taken to find people to look after me at the Hall." "Oh, I'm sure that was nothing, Mr. Humphreys, but I really do think that you'll find them give satisfaction. The man and his wife, whom we've got for the butler and housekeeper, we've known for a number of years. Such a nice, respectable couple. And Mr. Cooper, I'm sure, can answer for the men in the stables and the gardens." "Yes, Mr. Humphreys, they're a good lot. The head gardener's the only one who stopped on from Mr. Wilson's time. The major part of the employees, as you no doubt saw by the will, received legacies from the old gentleman and retired from their posts. And, as the wife says, your housekeeper and butler are calculated to render you every satisfaction. So everything, Mr. Humphreys, is ready for you to step in this very day, according to what I understood you to wish," said Mrs. Cooper. "Everything, that is, except company. And there, I'm afraid, you'll find yourself quite at a standstill. Only we did understand it was your intention to move in at once. If not, I'm sure you know we should have been only too pleased for you to stay here." "I'm quite sure you would, Mrs. Cooper, and I'm very grateful to you. But I thought I had really better make the plunge at once. I'm accustomed to living alone, and there will be quite enough to occupy my evenings, looking over papers and books and so on, for some time to come. I thought if Mr. Cooper could spare the time this afternoon to go over the house and grounds with me." "Certainly, certainly, Mr. Humphreys. My time is your own, up to any hour you please." "Till dinner time, father, you mean," said Miss Cooper. "Don't forget we're going over to the Brassnets. And have you got all the garden keys?" "Are you a great gardener, Miss Cooper?" said Mr. Humphreys. "I wish you would tell me what I'm to expect at the Hall." "Oh, I don't know about being a great gardener, Mr. Humphreys. I'm very fond of flowers, but the whole garden might be made quite lovely, I often say. It's very old-fashioned as it is, and a great deal of shrubbery. There's an old temple besides, and a maze." "Really? Have you explored it ever?" "No," said Miss Cooper, drawing in her lips and shaking her head. "I've often longed to try, but old Mr. Wilson always kept it locked. He wouldn't even let Lady Wardrop into it. She lives near here at Bentley, you know, and she's a great gardener, if you like. That's why I asked father if he had all the key." "I see. Well, I must evidently look into that and show you over it when I've learnt the way." "Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Humphreys. Now I shall have the laugh of Miss Foster. That's our rector's daughter, you know. They're away on their holiday now. Such nice people. We always had a joke between us which should be the first to get into the maze." "I think the garden keys must be up at the house," said Mr. Cooper, who had been looking over a large bunch. "There's a number there in the library. Now, Mr. Humphreys, if you're prepared, we might bid goodbye to these ladies and set forward on our little tour of exploration." As they came out of Mr. Cooper's front gate, Humphreys had to run the gauntlet, not of an organised demonstration, but of a good deal of touching of hats and careful contemplation from the men and women who had gathered in somewhat unusual numbers in the village street. He had further to exchange some remarks with the wife of the lodge-keeper as they passed the park gates, and with the lodge-keeper himself, who was attending to the park road. I cannot, however, spare the time to report the progress fully. As they traversed the half-mile or so between the lodge and the house, Humphreys took occasion to ask his companion some question which brought up the topic of his late uncle, and it did not take long before Mr. Cooper was embarked upon a disquisition. "It is singular to think, as the wife was saying just now, that you should never have seen the old gentleman. And yet, you won't misunderstand me, Mr. Humphreys, I feel confident, when I say that in my opinion there would have been but little congeniality betwixt yourself and him. Not that I have a word to say in deprecation, not a single word. I can tell you what he was," said Mr. Cooper, pulling up suddenly and fixing Humphreys with his eye. "Can tell you what he was in a nutshell, as the saying goes. He was a complete, thorough valetudinarian. That describes him to a T. That's what he was, sir, a complete valetudinarian. No participation in what went on around him. I did venture, I think, to send you a few words of cutting from our local paper, which I took the occasion to contribute on his decease. If I recollect myself aright, such is very much the gist of them. But don't, Mr. Humphreys," continued Cooper, tapping him impressively on the chest, "don't you run away with the impression that I wish to say aught but what is most creditable of your respected uncle and my late employer. Upright, Mr. Humphreys, open as the day, liberal to all in his dealings. He had the heart to feel and the hand to accommodate. But there it was, there was the stumbling block, his unfortunate health, or, as I might more truly phrase it, his want of health." "Yes, poor man. Did he suffer from any special disorder before his last illness, which I take it was little more than old age?" "Just that, Mr. Humphreys, just that." "The flash flickering slowly away in the pan," said Cooper, with what he considered an appropriate gesture. "The golden bowl gradually ceasing to vibrate. But as to your other question, I should return a negative answer. General absence of vitality? Yes. Special complaint? No, unless you reckon a nasty cough he had with him. Why, here we are, pretty much at the house. A handsome mansion, Mr. Humphreys, don't you consider? It deserved the epithet on the whole, but it was oddly proportioned. A very tall red brick house with a plain parapet concealing the roof almost entirely. It gave the impression of a town house set down in the country. There was a basement and a rather imposing flight of steps leading up to the front door. It seemed also, owing to its height, to desiderate wings, but there were none. The stables and other offices were concealed by trees. Humphreys guessed its probable date as 1770 or thereabouts. The mature couple who had been engaged to act as butler and cook housekeeper were waiting inside the front door, and opened it as their new master approached. Their name, Humphreys already knew, was Colton. Of their appearance and manner he formed a favourable impression in the few minutes' talk he had with them. It was agreed that he should go through the plate and the cellar next day with Mr. Colton, and that Mrs. C. should have a talk with him about linen, bedding, and so on, what there was and what there ought to be. Then he and Cooper, dismissing the Coltons for the present, began their view of the house. Its topography was not of importance to this story. The large rooms on the ground floor were satisfactory, especially the library, which was as large as the dining room, and had 3 tall windows facing east. The bedroom, prepared for Humphreys, was immediately above it. There were many pleasant and a few really interesting old pictures. None of the furniture was new, and hardly any of the books were later than the 70s. After hearing of and seeing the few changes his uncle had made in the house, and contemplating a shiny portrait of him which adorned the drawing-room, Humphreys was forced to agree with Cooper that, in all probability, there would have been little to attract him in his predecessor. It made him rather sad that he could not be sorry. Dolebat se dolere non posse, for the man who, whether with or without some feeling of kindliness towards his unknown nephew, had contributed so much to his well-being. For he felt that Wilsthorpe was a place in which he could be happy, and especially happy, it might be, in its library. And now it was time to go over the garden. The empty stables could wait, and so could the laundry. So to the garden they addressed themselves. and it was soon evident that Miss Cooper had been right in thinking that there were possibilities. Also that Mr. Cooper had done well in keeping on the gardener. The deceased Mr. Wilson might not have, indeed plainly had not, been imbued with the latest views on gardening, but whatever had been done here had been done under the eye of a knowledgeable man, and the equipment and stock were excellent. Cooper was delighted with the pleasure Humphreys showed, and with the suggestion he let fall from time to time. "I can see," he said, "that you found your meteor here, Mr. Humphreys. You'll make this place a regular signosia before very many seasons have passed over our heads. I wish Clutterham had been here, that's the head gardener. And here he would have been, of course, as I told you, but for his son's being horse-duber with a fever, poor fellow. I should like him to have heard how the place strikes you. Yes, you told me he couldn't be here today, and I was very sorry to hear the reason, but it will be time enough tomorrow. What's that white building on the mound at the end of the grass ride? Is it the temple Miss Cooper mentioned?" "That it is, Mr. Humphreys, the Temple of Friendship, constructed of marble brought out of Italy for the purpose by your late uncle's grandfather. Would it interest you, perhaps, to take a turn there? You get a very sweet prospect of the park." The general lines of the temple were those of the Sibyl's Temple at Tivoli, helped out by a dome, only the whole was a good deal smaller. Some ancient sepulchral reliefs were built into the wall, and about it all was a pleasant flavour of the grand tour. Cooper produced the key, and with some difficulty opened the heavy door. Inside there was a handsome ceiling, but little furniture. Most of the floor was occupied by a pile of thick circular blocks of stone, each of which had a single letter deeply cut on its slightly convex upper surface. "What's the meaning of these?" Humphreys inquired. "Meaning? Well, all things, we're told, have their purpose, Mr. Humphreys, and I suppose these blocks have had theirs as well as another. But what that purpose is, or was," Mr. Cooper assumed a didactic attitude here, "I, for one, should be at loss to point out to you, sir. All I know of them, and it's summed up in a very few words, is just this, that they're stated to have been removed by your late uncle at a period before I entered on the scene from the maze. That, Mr. Humphreys, is—" "Oh, the maze!" exclaimed Humphreys. "I'd forgotten that. We must have a look at it. Where is it?" Cooper drew him to the door of the temple and pointed with his stick. "Guide your eye," he said, somewhat in the manner of the second elder in Handel's Susanna. "Far to the west direct your straining eyes, where yon tall holm tree rises to the skies. Guide your eye by my stick here, and follow out the line directly opposite to the spot where we're standing now, and I'll engage, Mr. Humphreys, that you'll catch the archway over the entrance. You see it just at the end of the walk, answering to the one that leads up to this very building. Did you think of going there at once? Because if that be the case, I must go to the house and procure the key. If you would walk on there, I'll rejoin you in a few moments' time." Accordingly, Humphreys strolled down the ride leading to the temple, past the garden front of the house, and up the turfy approach to the archway which Cooper had pointed out to him. He was surprised to find that the whole maze was surrounded by a high wall, and that the archway was provided with a padlocked iron gate. But then he remembered that Miss Cooper had spoken of his uncle's objection to letting anyone enter this part of the garden. He was now at the gate, and still Cooper came not. For a few minutes he occupied himself in reading the motto cut over the entrance, "Secretum meum mihi et filiis domus meae," and in trying to recollect the source of it. Then he became impatient, and considered the possibility of scaling the wall. This was clearly not worthwhile. It might have been done if he had been wearing an older suit. Or could the padlock, a very old one, be forced? No, apparently not. And yet, as he gave a final irritated kick at the gate, something gave way, and the lock fell at his feet. He pushed the gate open, inconveniencing a number of nettles as he did so, and stepped into the enclosure. It was a yew maze of circular form, and the hedges, long untrimmed, had grown out and upwards to a most unorthodox breadth and height. The walks, too, were next door to impassable. Only by entirely disregarding scratches, nettle stings, and wet would Humphreys force his way among them. But at any rate, this condition of things, he reflected, would make it easier for him to find his way out again, for he left a very visible track. So far as he could remember, he had never been in a maze before, nor did it seem to him now that he had missed much. Dankness and darkness and smell of crushed goosegrass and nettles were anything but cheerful. Still, it did not seem to be a very intricate specimen of its kind. Here he was. Oh, by the way, was that Cooper arrived at last? No. Very nearly at the heart of it, without having taken much thought as to what path he was following. Ah, there at last was the centre, easily gained, and there was something to reward him. His first impression was that the central ornament was a sundial, but when he had switched away some portion of the thick growth of brambles and bindweed that had formed over it, he saw that it was a less ordinary decoration, a stone column about 4 feet high, and on the top of it a metal globe, copper, to judge from the green patina, engraved, and finely engraved too, with figures in outline and letters. That was what Humphrey saw, and a brief glance at the figures convinced him that it was one of those mysterious things called celestial globes, from which, one would suppose, no one ever yet derived any information about the heavens. However, it was too dark, at least in the maze, for him to examine this curiosity at all closely. And besides, he now heard Cooper's voice and sounds as of an elephant in the jungle. Humphreys called to him to follow the track he had beaten out, and soon Cooper emerged, panting, into the central circle. He was full of apologies for his delay, but he had not been able after all to find the key. But there, he said, you've penetrated into the heart of the mystery unaided and unannealed, as the saying goes. Well, I suppose it's a matter of 30 or 40 years since any human foot has trod these precincts. Certain it is that I've never set foot in them before. Well, well, what's the old proverb about angels fearing to tread? It's proved true once again in this case. Humphrey's acquaintance with Cooper, though it had been short, was sufficient to assure him that there was no guile in this illusion, and he forbore the obvious remark, merely suggesting that it was fully time to get back to the house for a late cup of tea, and to release Cooper for his evening engagement. They left the maze accordingly, experiencing well-nigh the same ease in retracing their path as they had in coming in. "Have you any idea," Humphreys asked as they went towards the house, "why my uncle kept that place so carefully locked?" Cooper pulled up, and Humphreys felt that he must be on the brink of a revelation. "I should merely be deceiving you, Mr. Humphreys, and that to no good purpose, if I laid claim to possess any information whatsoever on that topic. When I first entered upon my duties here, some 18 years back, that maze was word for word in the condition you see it now, and the one and only occasion on which the question ever arose within my knowledge was that of which my girl made mention in your hearing. Lady Wardrop, not a word to say against her, wrote applying for admission to the maze. Your uncle showed me the note, a most civil note, everything that could be expected from such a quarter. 'Cooper,' he said, 'I wish you'd reply to that note on my behalf.' 'Certainly, Mr. Wilson,' I said, for I was quite inured to acting as his secretary. 'What answer shall I return to it?' 'Well,' he said, 'give Lady Wardrop my compliments, and tell her that if ever that portion of the grounds is taken in hand, I shall be happy to give her the first opportunity of viewing it, but that it has been shut up now for a number of years, and I shall be grateful to her if she kindly won't press the matter.' That, Mr. Humphreys, was your good uncle's last word on the subject, and I don't think I can add anything to it. Unless," added Cooper, after a pause, "it might just be this, that, so far as I could form a judgment, he had a dislike, as people often will for one reason or another, to the memory of his grandfather, who, as I mentioned to you, had that maze laid out. A man of peculiar tenets, Mr. Humphrey, and a great traveller. You will have the opportunity on the coming Sabbath of seeing the table to him in our little parish church. Put up, it was, some long time after his death. Oh, I should have expected the man who had such a taste for building to have designed a mausoleum for himself. Well, I've never noticed anything of the kind you mention, and, in fact, come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that his resting place is within our boundaries at all. That he lays in the vault, I'm pretty confident, is not the case. Curious now that I shouldn't be in a position to inform you on that heading. Still, after all, we can't say, can we, Mr. Humphreys, that it's a point of crucial importance where the poor mortal coils are bestowed. At this point they entered the house, and Cooper's speculations were interrupted. Tea was laid in the library, where Mr. Cooper fell upon subjects appropriate to the scene. A fine collection of books, one of the finest I've understood from connoisseurs in this part of the country. Splendid plates, too, in some of these works. I recollect your uncle showing me one with views of foreign towns. Most absorbing it was, got up in first-rate style, and another all done by hand with the ink as fresh as if it had been laid on yesterday. And yet, he told me, it was the work of some old monk, hundreds of years back. I've always taken a keen interest in literature myself. Hardly anything, to my mind, can compare with a good hour's reading after a hard day's work. Far better than wasting the whole evening at a friend's house. And that reminds me, to be sure, I shall be getting into trouble with the wife if I don't make the best of my way home and get ready to squander away one of those same evenings. I must be off, Mr. Humphreys. And that reminds me, said Humphreys, if I'm to show Miss Cooper the maze tomorrow, we must have it cleared out a bit. Could you say a word about that to the proper person? Why, to be sure, a couple of men with scythes could cut out a track tomorrow morning. I'll leave word as I pass the lodge, and I'll tell them, what'll save you the trouble perhaps, Mr. Humphreys, of having to go up and extract them yourself, that they'd better have some sticks or a tape to mark out their way with as they go on. A very good idea, yes, do that. And I'll expect Mrs. and Miss Cooper in the afternoon, and yourself about 10:30 in the morning. It'll be a pleasure, I'm sure, both to them and to myself, Mr. Humphreys. Good night. Humphreys dined at 8, but for the fact that it was his first evening, and that Carlton was evidently inclined for occasional conversation, he would have finished the novel he had bought for his journey. As it was, he had to listen and reply to some of Carlton's impressions of the neighbourhood and the season. The latter, it appeared, was seasonable, and the former had changed considerably, and not altogether for the worse, since Carlton's boyhood, which had been spent there. The village shop in particular had greatly improved since the year 1870. It was now possible to procure there pretty much anything you liked in reason, which was a conveniency, because suppose anything was required of a sudden, and he had known such things before now, he, Carlton, could step down there, supposing the shop still to be open, and order it in, without he borrowed it of the rectory, whereas in earlier days it would have been useless to pursue such a course in respect of anything but candles, or soap, or treacle, or perhaps a penny child's picture book, and 9 times out of 10 it would be something more in the nature of a bottle of whisky you'd be requiring, leastway. On the whole, Humphreys thought he would be prepared with a book in future. The library was the obvious place for the after-dinner hours. Candle in hand and pipe in mouth, he moved round the room for some time, taking stock of titles of the books. He had all the predisposition to take interest in an old library, and there was every opportunity for him here to make systematic acquaintance with one, for he had learned from Cooper that there was no catalogue, save the very superficial one made for purposes of probate. The drawing up of a catalogue raisonné would be a delicious occupation for winter. There were probably treasures to be found too, even manuscripts, if Cooper might be trusted. As he pursued his round, the sense came upon him, as it does upon most of us in similar places, of the extreme unreadableness of a great portion of the collection. Editions of classics and fathers, and Picard's religious ceremonies, and the Harleian miscellany, I suppose, are all very well, but who is ever going to read Tostatus Abulensis, or Pineda on Job, or a book like this? He picked out a small quarto loose in the binding, and from which the lettered label had fallen off, and, observing that coffee was waiting for him, retired to a chair. Eventually he opened the book. It will be observed that his condemnation of it rested wholly on external ground. For all he knew, it might have been a collection of unique plays, but undeniably the outside was blank and forbidding. As a matter of fact, it was a collection of sermons or meditations, and mutilated at that, for the first sheet was gone. It seemed to belong to the latter end of the 17th century. He turned over the pages till his eye was caught by a marginal note, the parable of this unhappy condition, and he thought he would see what aptitudes the author might have for imaginative composition. I have heard or read, so ran the passage, whether in the way of parable or true relation, I leave my reader to judge, of a man who, like Theseus in the Attic tale, should adventure himself into a labyrinth or maze, and such an one indeed as was not laid out in the fashion of our topiary artists of this age, but of a wide compass, in which, moreover, such unknown pitfalls and snares, nay, such ill-omened inhabitants, were commonly thought to lurk as could only be encountered at the hazard of one's very life. Now, you may be sure that in such a case the dissuasions of friends were not wanting. Consider of such an one, says a brother, how he went the way you wot of, and was never seen more. Or of such another, says the mother, that adventured himself but a little way in, and from that day forth is so troubled in his wits, that he cannot tell what he saw, nor hath passed one good night. And have you never heard, cries a neighbour, of what faces have been seen to look out over the palisadoes and betwixt the bars of the gate? But all would not do. The man was set upon his purpose, for it seems it was the common fireside talk of that country that at the heart and centre of this labyrinth there was a jewel of such price and rarity that would enrich the finder thereof for his life, and this should be his by right that could persevere to come at it. What then? Quid multa? The adventurer passed the gates, and for a whole day's space his friends without had no news of him, except it might be by some indistinct cry heard afar off in the night, such as made them turn in their restless beds and sweat for very fear, not doubting but their son and brother had put one more to the catalogue of those unfortunates that had suffered shipwreck on that voyage. So the next day they went with weeping tears to the clerk of the parish to order the bell to be tolled, and their way took them hard by the gate of the labyrinth, which they would have hastened by from the horror they had of it, but that they caught sight of a sudden of a man's body lying in the roadway, and going up to it with what anticipations may be easily figured, found it to be him whom they reckoned as lost and not dead, though he were in a swoon most like death. They then, who had gone forth as mourners, came back rejoicing, and set to by all means to revive their prodigal, who, being come to himself, and hearing of their anxieties and their errand of that morning, "Aye," says he, "you may as well finish what you were about, for all I have brought back the jewel," which he showed them, and 'twas indeed a rare piece, "I have brought back that with it that will leave me neither rest at night, nor pleasure by day." Whereupon they were instant with him to learn his meaning, and where his company should be that went so sore against his stomach. "Oh," says he, "'tis here, in my breast. I cannot flee from it, do what I may." So it needed no wizard to help them to a guess that it was the recollection of what he had seen that troubled him so wonderfully. But they could get no more of him for a long time but by fits and starts. However, at long and at last they made shift to collect somewhat of this kind, that at first, while the sun was bright, he went merrily on, and without any difficulty reached the heart of the labyrinth and caught the jewel, and so set out on his way back rejoicing. But as the night fell, wherein all the beasts of the forest do move, he began to be sensible of some creature keeping pace with him, and, as he thought, peering and looking upon him from the next alley to that he was in, and that when he should stop, this companion should stop also, which put him in some disorder of his spirits. And indeed, as the darkness increased, it seemed to him that there was more than one, and it might be even a whole band of such followers. At least so he judged by the rustling and cracking that they kept among the thickets, besides that there would be at a time a sound of whispering, which seemed to import a conference among them. But in regard of who they were, or what form they were of, he would not be persuaded to say what he thought. Upon his hearers asking him what the cries were which they heard in the night, as was observed above, he gave them this account, that about midnight, so far as he could judge, he heard his name called from a long way off, and he would have been sworn it was his brother that so called him. So he stood still and hallooed at the pitch of his voice, and he supposed that the echo of the noise of his shouting disguised for the moment any lesser sound, because when there fell a stillness again, he distinguished a trampling, not loud, of running feet, coming very close to him, wherewith he was so daunted that himself set off to run, and that he continued till the dawn broke. Sometimes when his breath failed him, he would cast himself flat on his face, and hope that his pursuers might overrun him in the darkness, but at such a time they would regularly make a pause, and he could hear them pant and snuff, as it had been a hound at fault, which wrought in him so extreme an horror of mind that he would be forced to betake himself again to turning and doubling, if by any means he might throw them off the scent, and, as if this exertion was in itself not terrible enough, he had before him the constant fear of falling into some pit or trap of which he had heard, and indeed seen with his own eyes that there were several, some at the sides and other in the midst of the alleys. So that in fine, he said, a more dreadful night was never spent by mortal creature than that he had endured in that labyrinth, and not that jewel which he had in his wallet, nor the richest that was ever brought out of the Indies, could be a sufficient recompense to him for the pains he had suffered. I will spare to set down the further recital of this man's trouble, inasmuch as I am confident my reader's intelligence will hit the parallel I desire to draw. For is not this jewel a just emblem of the satisfaction which a man may bring back with him from a course of this world's pleasures? And will not the labyrinth serve for an image of the world itself, wherein such a treasure, if we may believe the common voice, is stored up? At about this point, Humphreys thought that a little patience would be an agreeable change, and that the writer's improvement of his parable might be left to itself. So he put the book back in its former place, wondering as he did so whether his uncle had ever stumbled across that passage, and if so, whether it had worked on his fancy so much as to make him dislike the idea of a maze, and determine to shut up the one in the garden. Not long afterwards he went to bed. The next day brought a morning's hard work with Mr. Cooper, who, if exuberant in language, had the business of the estate at his fingers' ends. He was very breezy this morning, Mr. Cooper was. He had not forgotten the order to clear out the maze. The work was going on at that moment. His girl was on the tentacles of expectation about it. He also hoped that Humphreys had slept the sleep of the just, and that we should be favoured with the continuance of this congenial weather. At luncheon he enlarged on the pictures in the dining room, and pointed out the portrait of the constructor of the temple in the maze. Humphreys examined this with considerable interest. It was the work of an Italian, and had been painted when old Mr. Wilson was visiting Rome as a young man. There was indeed a view of the Colosseum in the background. A pale, thin face and large eyes were the characteristic features. In the hand was a partially unfolded roll of paper, on which could be distinguished the plan of a circular building, very probably the temple, and also part of that of a labyrinth. Humphreys got up on a chair to examine it, but it was not painted with sufficient clearness to be worth copying. It suggested to him, however, that he might as well make a plan of his own maze and hang it in the hall for the use of his visitors. This determination of his was confirmed that same afternoon, for when Mrs. and Miss Cooper arrived, eager to be inducted into the maze, he found that he was wholly unable to lead them to the centre. The gardeners had removed the guide marks they had been using, and even Clutterham, when summoned to assist, was as helpless as the rest. The point is, you see, Mr. Wilson, I should say Humphreys, these mazes is purposely constructed so much alike with a view to mislead. Still, if you follow me, I think I can put you right. I'll just put my hat down here as a starting point. He stumped off, and after 5 minutes brought the party safe to the hat again. "Now, that's a very peculiar thing," he said, with a sheepish laugh. "I made sure I'd left that hat just over against the bramble bush, and you can see for yourself there ain't no bramble bush, not in this walk at all. If you'll allow me, Mr. Humphreys, that's the name, ain't it, sir? I'll just call one of the men in to mark the place, like." William Crack arrived in answer to repeated shouts. He had some difficulty in making his way to the party. First he was seen or heard in an inside alley, then, almost at the same moment, in an outer one. However, he joined them at last, and was first consulted without effect, and then stationed by the hat, which Clutterham still considered it necessary to leave on the ground. In spite of this strategy, they spent the best part of 3/4 of an hour in quite fruitless wanderings, and Mr. Humphreys was obliged at last, seeing how tired Mrs. Cooper was becoming, to suggest a retreat to tea, with profuse apologies to Miss Cooper. "At any rate, you've won your bet with Miss Foster," he said. "You have been inside the maze, and I promise you the first thing I do shall be to make a proper plan of it with the lines marked out for you to go by." "That's what's wanted, sir," said Clutterham. "Someone to draw out a plan and keep it by them. It might be very awkward, you see, anyone getting into that place and a shower of rain come on, and them not being able to find their way out again. It might be hours before they could be got out, without, you'd permit of me making a short cut to the middle. What my meaning is, taking down a couple of trees in each edge in a straight line, so as you could get a clear view right through. Of course, that'd do away with it as a maze, but I don't know as you'd approve of that." "No, I won't have that done yet. I'll make a plan first, and I'll let you have a copy. Later on, if we find occasion, I'll think of what you say." Humphreys was vexed and ashamed at the fiasco of the afternoon, and could not be satisfied without making another effort that evening to reach the centre of the maze. His irritation was increased by finding it without a single false step. He had thoughts of beginning his plan at once, but the light was fading, and he felt that by the time he had got the necessary materials together, work would be impossible. Next morning, accordingly, carrying a drawing board, pencils, compasses, cartridge paper, and so forth, some of which had been borrowed from the Coopers and some found in the library cupboards, he went to the middle of the maze, again without any hesitation, and set out his materials. He was, however, delayed in making a start. The brambles and weeds that had obscured the column and globe were now all cleared away, and it was for the first time possible to see clearly what these were like. The column was featureless, resembling those on which sundials are usually placed. Not so the globe. I have said that it was finely engraved with figures and inscriptions, and that on a first glance Humphreys had taken it for a celestial globe. But he soon found that it did not answer to his recollection of such things. One feature seemed familiar. A winged serpent, Draco, encircled it about the place which, on a terrestrial globe, is occupied by the equator. But on the other hand, a good part of the upper hemisphere was covered by the outspread wings of a large figure, whose head was concealed by a ring at the pole or summit of the whole. Around the place of the head, the words Princeps Tenebrarum could be deciphered. In the lower hemisphere, there was a space hatched all over with cross lines and marked as Umbra Mortis. Near it, there was a range of mountains, and among them a valley with flames rising from it. This was lettered, will you be surprised to learn it, Vallis Filiorum Hinnom. Above and below Draco were outlined various figures not unlike the pictures of the ordinary constellations, but not the same. Thus, a nude man with a raised club was described not as Hercules, but as Cain. Another, plunged up to his middle in earth and stretching out despairing arms, was Kore, not Ophiuchus. And a third, hung by his hair to a snaky tree, was Absalom. Near the last, a man in long robes and high cap, standing in a circle and addressing two shaggy demons who hovered outside, was described as Hostanes Magus, a character unfamiliar to Humphreys. The scheme of the whole indeed seemed to be an assemblage of the patriarchs of evil, perhaps not uninfluenced by a study of Dante. Humphreys thought it an unusual exhibition of his great-grandfather's taste, but reflected that he had probably picked it up in Italy and never taken the trouble to examine it closely. Certainly, had he set much store by it, he would not have exposed it to wind and weather. He tapped the metal. It seemed hollow and not very thick, and turning from it, addressed himself to his plan. After half an hour's work, he found it was impossible to get on without using a clue, so he procured a roll of twine from Clutterham and laid it out along the alleys from the entrance to the centre, tying the end to the ring at the top of the globe. This expedient helped him to set out a rough plan before luncheon, and in the afternoon he was able to draw it in more neatly. Towards tea-time, Mr. Cooper joined him, and was much interested in his progress. "Now this," said Mr. Cooper, laying his hand on the globe, and then drawing it away hastily. "Phew! Holds the heat, doesn't it? To a surprising degree." "Mr. Humphreys, I suppose this metal, copper, isn't it, would be an insulator or conductor or whatever they call it." "The sun has been pretty strong this afternoon," said Humphreys, evading the scientific point. "But I didn't notice the globe had got hot." "No, it doesn't seem very hot to me," he added. "Odd," said Mr. Cooper. "Now, I can't hardly bear my hand on it. Something in the difference of temperament between us, I suppose. I dare say you're a chilly subject, Mr. Humphreys." "I'm not, and there's where the distinction lies. All this summer I've slept, if you believe me, practically in statu quo, and had my morning tub as cold as I could get it, day out and day in. Let me assist you with that string." "It's all right, thanks, but if you'll collect some of these pencils and things that are lying about, I shall be much obliged. Now, I think we've got everything, and we might get back to the house." They left the maze, Humphrey rolling up the clue as they went. The night was rainy. Most unfortunately, it turned out that, whether by Cooper's fault or not, the plan had been the one thing forgotten the evening before. As was to be expected, it was ruined by the wet. There was nothing for it but to begin again. The job wouldn't be a long one this time. The clue, therefore, was put in place once more, and a fresh start made. But Humphreys had not done much before an interruption came in the shape of Colton with a telegram. His late chief in London wanted to consult him. Only a brief interview was wanted, but the summons was urgent. This was annoying, yet it was not really upsetting. There was a train available in half an hour, and unless things went very cross, he could be back possibly by 5 o'clock, certainly by 8. He gave the plan to Colton to take to the house, but it was not worthwhile to remove the clue. All went as he had hoped. He spent a rather exciting evening in the library, for he lighted upon a cupboard where some of the rarer books were kept. When he went up to bed, he was glad to find that the servant had remembered to leave his curtains undrawn and his windows open. He put down his light and went to the window, which commanded a view of the garden and the park. It was a brilliant moonlight night. In a few weeks' time, the sonorous winds of autumn would break up all this calm. But now the distant woods were in a deep stillness. The slopes of the lawns were shining with dew. The colours of some of the flowers could almost be guessed. The light of the moon just caught the cornice of the temple and the curve of its leaden dome, and Humphrey had to own that, so seen, these conceits of a past age have a real beauty. In short, the light is the perfume of the woods, and the absolute quiet pulled up such kind old associations in his mind that he went on ruminating them for a long, long time. As he turned from the window, he felt he had never seen anything more complete of its sort. The one feature that struck him with a sense of incongruity was a small Irish yew, thin and black, which stood out like an outpost of the shrubbery through which the maze was approached. That, he thought, might as well be a way. The wonder was that anyone should have thought it would look well in that position. However, next morning, in the press of answering letters and going over books with Mr. Cooper, the Irish yew was forgotten. One letter, by the way, arrived this day which has to be mentioned. It was from that Lady Wardrop whom Miss Cooper had mentioned, and it renewed the application which she had addressed to Mr. Wilson. She pleaded, in the first place, that she was about to publish a book of mazes, and earnestly desired to include the plan of the Wilsthorpe maze, and also that it would be a great kindness if Mr. Humphreys could let her see it, if at all, at an early date, since she would soon have to go abroad for the winter months. Her house at Bentley was not far distant, so Humphreys was able to send a note by hand to her suggesting the very next day or the day after for her visit. It may be said at once that the messenger brought back a most grateful answer to the effect that the morrow would suit her admirably. The only other event of the day was that the plan of the maze was successfully finished. This night again was fair and brilliant and calm, and Humphreys lingered almost as long at his window. The Irish yew came to his mind again as he was on the point of drawing his curtains, but either he had been misled by a shadow the night before, or else the shrub was not really so obtrusive as he had fancied. Anyhow, he saw no reason for interfering with it. What he would do away with, however, was a clump of dark growth which had usurped a place against the house wall and was threatening to obscure one of the lower range of windows. It did not look as if it could possibly be worth keeping. He fancied it dank and unhealthy, little as he could see of it. The next day, it was a Friday, he had arrived at Wilsthorpe on a Monday. Lady Wardrop came over in her car soon after luncheon. She was a stout elderly person, very full of talk of all sorts, and particularly inclined to make herself agreeable to Humphreys, who had gratified her very much by his ready granting of her request. They made a thorough exploration of the place together, and Lady Wardrop's opinion of her host obviously rose sky high when she found that he really knew something of gardening. She entered enthusiastically into all his plans for improvement, but agreed that it would be a vandalism to interfere with the characteristic laying out of the ground near the house. With the temple she was particularly delighted, and, said she, "Do you know, Mr. Humphreys, I think your bailiff must be right about those lettered blocks of stone. One of my mazes, I'm sorry to say the stupid people have destroyed it now. It was at a place in Hampshire, had the track marked out in that way. There were tiles there, but lettered, just like yours. And the letters, taken in the right order, formed an inscription. What it was I forget, something about Theseus and Ariadne. I have a copy of it, as well as the plans of the maze where it was. How people can do such things! I shall never forgive you if you injure your maze. Do you know they're becoming very uncommon? Almost every year I hear of one being grubbed up. Now, do let's get straight to it, or if you're too busy, I know my way there perfectly, and I'm not afraid of getting lost in it. I know too much about mazes for that. Though I remember missing my lunch not so very long ago either, through getting entangled in the one in Busbury. Well, of course, if you can manage to come with me, that will be all the nicer." After this confident prelude, justice would seem to require that Lady Wardrop should have been hopelessly muddled by the Wilsthorpe maze. Nothing of that kind happened. Yet it is to be doubted whether she got all the enjoyment from her new specimen that she expected. She was interested, keenly interested, to be sure, and pointed out to Humphreys a series of little depressions in the ground which she thought marked the places of the lettered blocks. She told him, too, what other mazes resembled his most closely in arrangement, and explained how it was usually possible to date a maze to within 20 years by means of its plan. This one, she already knew, must be about as old as 1780, and its features were just what might be expected. The globe, furthermore, completely absorbed her. It was unique in her experience, and she pored over it for long. "I should like a rubbing of that," she said, "if it could possibly be made. Yes, I'm sure you will be most kind about it, Mr. Humphreys, but I trust you won't attempt it on my account. I do indeed. I shouldn't like to take any liberties here. I have the feeling that it might be resented. Now, confess," she went on, turning and facing Humphreys, "don't you feel, haven't you felt ever since you came in here, that a watch is being kept on us, and that if we overstepped the mark in any way, there would be, a pounce?" "No, I do, and I don't care how soon we are outside the gate." "After all," she said, when they were once more on their way to the house, "it may have been only the airlessness and the dull heat of that place that pressed on my brain. Still, I'll take back one thing I said. I'm not sure that I shan't forgive you after all if I find next spring that maze has been grubbed up. Whether or not that's done, you shall have the plan, Lady Wardrop. I have made one, and no later than tonight I can trace you a copy." "Admirable. A pencil tracing will be all I want, with an indication of the scale. I can easily have it brought into line with the rest of my plates. Many, many thanks." "Very well, you shall have that tomorrow. I wish you could help me to a solution of my block puzzle." "What, those stones in the summer house? That is a puzzle. They are in no sort of order, of course not, but the men who put them down must have had some directions, and perhaps you'll find a paper about it among your uncle's things. If not, you will have to call in somebody who's an expert in ciphers." "Advise me about something else, please," said Humphrey. "That bush thing under the library window. You would have that away, wouldn't you?" "Which? That? I think not," said Lady Wardrop. "I can't see it very well from this distance, but it's not unsightly." "Perhaps you're right, only looking out of my window just above it last night, I thought it took up too much room. It doesn't seem to, as one sees it from here, certainly." "Very well, I'll leave it alone for a bit." Tea was the next business, soon after which Lady Wardrop drove off. But halfway down the drive she stopped the car and beckoned to Humphreys, who was still on the front doorstep. He ran to glean her parting words, which were, "It just occurs to me. It might be worth your while to look at the underside of those stones. They must have been numbered, mustn't they? Goodbye again. Home, please." The main occupation of this evening, at any rate, was settled. The tracing of the plan for Lady Wardrop, and the careful collation of it with the original, and a couple of hours' work at least. Accordingly, soon after 9, Humphreys had his materials put out in the library and began. It was a still, stuffy evening. Windows had to stand open, and he had more than one grisly encounter with a bat. These unnerving episodes made him keep the tail of his eye on the window. Once or twice it was a question whether there was, not a bat, but something more considerable that had a mind to join him. How unpleasant it would be if someone had slipped noiselessly over the sill and was crouching on the floor. The tracing of the plan was done. It remained to compare it with the original and to see whether any parts had been wrongly closed or left open. With one finger on each paper, he traced out the course that must be followed from the entrance. There were one or two slight mistakes, but here, near the centre, was a bad confusion, probably due to the entry of the second or third bat. Before correcting the copy, he followed out carefully the last turnings of the path on the original. These, at least, were right. They led, without a hitch, to the middle space. Here was a feature which need not be repeated on the copy, an ugly black spot about the size of a shilling. Ink? No. It resembled a hole, but how should a hole be there? He stared at it with tired eyes. The work of tracing had been very laborious, and he was drowsy and oppressed. But surely this was a very odd hole. It seemed to go not only through the paper, but through the table on which it lay. Yes, and through the floor below that. Down, and still down, even into infinite depth. He craned over it, utterly bewildered, just as, when you were a child, you may have pored over a square inch of counterpane until it became a landscape with wooded hills, and perhaps even churches and houses, and you lost all thought of the true size of yourself, and it. So this hole seemed to Humphreys for the moment the only thing in the world. For some reason, it was hateful to him from the first, but he had gazed at it for some moments before any feeling of anxiety came upon him, and then it did come, stronger and stronger, a horror lest something might emerge from it, and a really agonizing conviction that a terror was on its way, from the sight of which he would not be able to escape. Oh, yes, far down there was a movement, and the movement was upwards, towards the surface. Nearer and nearer it came, and it was of a blackish grey colour, with more than one dark hole. It took shape as a face, a human face, a burnt human face, and with the odious writhings of a wasp creeping out of a rotten apple, there clambered forth an appearance of a form, waving black arms prepared to clasp the head that was bending over them. With a convulsion of despair, Humphreys threw himself back, struck his head against a hanging lamp, and fell. There was concussion of the brain, shock to the system, and a long confinement to bed. The doctor was badly puzzled, not by the symptoms, but by a request which Humphreys made to him as soon as he was able to say anything. "I wish you would open the ball in the maze." "Hardly room enough there, I should have thought," was the best answer he could summon up. "But it's more in your way than mine. My dancing days are over." At which Humphreys muttered and turned over to sleep, and the doctor intimated to the nurses that the patient was not out of the wood yet. When he was better able to express his views, Humphreys made his meaning clear, and received a promise that the thing should be done at once. He was so anxious to learn the result that the doctor, who seemed a little pensive next morning, saw that more harm than good would be done by saving up his report. "Well," he said, "I'm afraid the ball is done for. The metal must have worn thin, I suppose. Anyhow, it went all to bits with the first blow of the chisel." "Well, go on, do," said Humphreys impatiently. "Oh, you want to know what we found in it, of course. Well, it was half full of stuff like ashes." "Ashes? What did you make of them?" "I haven't thoroughly examined them yet. There's hardly been time, but Cooper's made up his mind, I dare say from something I said, that it's a case of cremation. Now, don't excite yourself, my good sir. Yes, I must allow I think he's probably right. The maze is gone, and Lady Wardrop has forgiven Humphrey. In fact, I believe he married her niece. She was right, too, in her conjecture that the stones in the temple were numbered. There had been a numeral painted on the bottom of each. Some few of these had rubbed off, but enough remained to enable Humphreys to reconstruct the inscription. It ran thus: Penetrans ad interiora mortis. Grateful as Humphreys was to the memory of his uncle, he could not quite forgive him for having burnt the journals and letters of the James Wilson who had gifted Woolsthorpe with the maze and the temple. As to the circumstances of that ancestor's death and burial, no tradition survived, but his will, which was almost the only record of him accessible, assigned an unusually generous legacy to a servant who bore an Italian name. Mr. Cooper's view is that, humanly speaking, all these many solemn events have a meaning for us, if our limited intelligence permitted of our disintegrating it. while Mr. Carlton has been reminded of an aunt, now gone from us, who about the year 1866 had been lost for upwards of an hour and a half in the maze at Covent Gardens, or it might have been Hampton Court. One of the oddest things in the whole series of transactions is that the book which contained the parable has entirely disappeared. Humphreys has never been able to find it since he copied out the passage to send to Lady Wardrobe.
Everybody dies, Everybody else. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the long door today,
So that was Mr. Humphreys and His Inheritance by M.R. James. Now, this isn't the first M.R. James story we've done, but I still will say very briefly about him, okay, for those of you who just kind of tuned in for this one. So, Montague Rhodes James was born on 1st of August 1862 in Goodnestone in Kent. He was the son of an Anglican clergyman who spent much of his childhood in Suffolk. So, that eastern part of England, he spent most of his life, not necessarily his Eton life, which is slightly to the west of London, but his formative years, if you like, in the eerie east of England, East Anglia. So James was a precocious child with a keen interest in antiquarian studies, particularly medieval history and literature. He attended Eton College and later King's College, Cambridge, where he distinguished himself as a brilliant scholar, eventually becoming Provost of King's in 1905. His academic career was illustrious, extensive work in medieval studies and his cataloguing of manuscript collections. So apparently you still, if you're in the medieval other manuscripts, he travelled across Europe. I read his letters and a collection of his letters, and he travelled all over collecting these manuscripts. And apparently you can still find his annotations. He's one of the most prolific annotators in the catalogues, okay. So he began reading and writing his ghost stories aloud to friends as a form of Christmas entertainment, a tradition he maintained throughout his life. His first collection, Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, was published in 1904, established his reputation as a master. The Jamesian story is very typical, it's usually an academic. It's somebody in the upper echelons of society, and it's about, they come across old things, relics, books, that bring forward secrets from, and usually kind of occult things from the past. He was 73 when he died in 1936, and he passed away at Eton College, where he'd been serving as provost since 1918. Up until his final years, he was active in both his scholarly pursuits and his literary endeavours. So this story was published in 1911, as I said, in part of his second collection, More Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. That came 7 years after the first one. It's a longish story. What do I want to say about it? There's a tremendous amount to say. I've got some notes, but I'm going to depart from the notes. I'm going to say, first of all, my response to the story. The thing about James is he can be genuinely scary, and we'll talk about why that might be later. But to me, the standout scary bits are the parable, this mock antiquarian document that has this guy venturing into a labyrinth and being tormented by demonic creatures in there. There's a lot to be said about the maze, and we probably haven't got time to say it all, but we'll come back to it. So that was a scary bit. The next scary bit is the creeping up of the thing in the hole. That is remarkably modern, and I think you find this in James's work, and let's just say the mezzotint, where there's that thing that is crawling across the painting, that emerges in the painting. Go and listen to my versions of that. If you haven't heard it, just stop now, go and listen to that and come back, if you remember. The next is, the famous "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You," where the bizarreness of the bed sheets and this uncanny figure walking across the beach, always at a distance. So in that, he is very modern, I think. We see that kind of unsettling weirdness in later writers. Lovecraft, of course, is very famous for that. I'm not sure that... I think Lovecraft admired James greatly. I'm not sure it was totally mutual. Lovecraft was... James was... He was deeply reactionary man, and he may have found Lovecraft a little vulgar. I don't know about that. If anybody has got a quote from James about Lovecraft, please let me know. So let's talk about that, what he does. And in modern horror, like Ligotti and most of the modern stuff that comes out now is almost surreal. It's been affected by surrealism. I realise surrealism is 100 years old and is long dead as an art form. But the weirdness, let's talk about the weird, the eerie and the uncanny, just so as you've got your head around it. So Mark Fisher, the late British, tragically took his own life in 2017. He wrote a seminal book called The Weird and the Eerie, about I Know We Can Understand. So what we have is the weird, where Fisher defines this as, Mark Fisher defines this as, the weird involves an encounter with the unfamiliar that breaks the norms of our reality. It often introduces an element that is utterly alien, leading to a sense of discomfort and estrangement. This concept draws heavily from the works of authors like H.P. Lovecraft. Here we go. Lovecraft, it's weird horror, it's cosmic horror, where the intrusion of the fundamentally otherworldly leads to a profound sense of unease. And what I would say is that thing, it's surreal, it comes out of a hole, it can't be. It is weird. The eerie, as we're talking about that's the weird bit, and it is unsettling. The eerie, on the other hand, concerns the unknown. It is a sense of unease emanating from a perceived absence or presence that shouldn't be there. The eerie often revolves around ambiguous spaces and unanswered questions that evoke a sense of haunting emptiness, whether it's through desolate landscapes, abandoned buildings, or mysterious occurrences. And what I would say about the eerie is there is an agency there. We suspect agency. So things become eerie when somebody has done something and we don't know why. I'm not sure that's prominent in this story. The other concept that Fisher talks about, he refers to Freud's concept of Sigmund Freud's concept of the uncanny. So Freud wrote a book in 1919 called The Uncanny. He says, that class of the frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar. And you'll maybe heard the story of the uncanny valley, and so things that are familiar but strange as we revisit them, like the face of a doll, or just ordinary things that just appear to be slightly out of kilter when we re-look at them. When we pay them attention, we think, that's not, it is, it's familiar, it looks like it, but there's something off. And Freud has this idea of the concept of the repressed. So things that have been, you may know that repression is a mechanism in Freudian psychodynamic theory, whereby things that are too upsetting to think about, we put away. We cut them out of our consciousness and we lock them up. But they have a way of coming back, and when they come back, they're tainted. So it could be that an object which is associated with a repression, something we don't want to think about, maybe a place where something happened that is too painful for us, we lock it away. We don't forget about it in a sense. In that we just forgetting implies we absent-mindedly just we drift off. But this isn't that. This is an active process in Freudian theory of putting something away. But it wants to come back. It is charged with libido. It wants to come back, and when it comes back, it brings all these unsettling feelings with it. We've repressed them. Because we've repressed them, we don't know why it's so unsettling, but it is. So we have the weird, the eerie, and the uncanny. Let's talk about how they may be here. The weird, first of all. The weird in Mr. Humphreys and his inheritance is exemplified by the grotesque and otherworldly elements that intrude on the everyday reality of the narrative. The vision of the burnt face emerging insect-like from a black hole in the traced maze plan is a prime example. That's the main example. This is a fundamentally alien and unsettling moment, and as I say, it has much more in common with later horror than it does earlier. And so there are many, excuse me, the dog's behind having a dream. There are many Gothic elements in this story, and perhaps I'll touch on those as well. And Gothic is where these things were coming from, where the ghost story was coming from. It has its birth in Gothic literature of the late 1700s and 1800s. But in a sense, James modernizes it. This story is a halfway house. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to go and give her a stroke. Hang on. Well, she feels better now. So this story is a halfway house between the modern and the old, if you like, in terms of ghost stories. So let's look at the classic Gothic story. So in the Gothic story, we have an ancient castle or mansion. Check. So in stories such as Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto and Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, grand decaying estates serve as more than mere settings. They are intricate characters that harbour secrets. I think the maze has a personality. More than a house, the maze has a personality in this. So he inherits it. So inheritance is a cursed inheritance. I can't say it. Cursed inheritances are a classic feature of Gothic. The Gothic often thinks about cursed bloodlines, family inheritances are cursed. Some sin of the fathers, which has come down to modern days and has to be faced or dealt with by the modern descendant. We've got all that. I think there are certain faults in this story, if I'm allowed to say that. And one is, for example, there is no character progression in this. Humphreys is the same man at the end as he is in the beginning. He could be changed and moved by others, but he appears to be. There's no sign that he's any different, is there? He marries the lady's niece, so that's like a happy ending, but so what? And it isn't his sin. So it's his sin through birth, I suppose, and that is the Gothic element. In a modern horror story, it's usually the protagonist's sin that he has to deal with, or she has to deal with. So, okay, we have this overgrown Gothic place, so Gothic, and we have the family inheritance. We have the weird servants that are often a comic thing. Weird servants are a feature of Gothic stories, and we have Colton. When you see it, he writes their and Mr. Cooper as well. He writes their dialogue as they speak, and inevitably they misspell. They mispronounce words, particularly Mr. Cooper, who tries to use words he doesn't really understand. And Colton is just kind of a lower class, really, and his speech is indicated as working class dialect, working class dialect. So I think that's Gothic as well. James often in his stories uses the working class people as rude mechanicals, like Shakespeare, of course, in A Midsummer Night's Dream. They are comic. They are intended to bring a little light relief to, and that's good because you need to leaven it. I think if you just have an unremittingly horrific story, then you miss something. And he does put a bit of comedy in with these servant characters, which is Gothic, So and also the other thing is Italy. So if you think it was Anne Radcliffe, the Italian and Castle of Otranto, these are in Italy. So Italy was at this time, or traditionally in British Gothic literature, was considered. You think there are places in Europe which were backward but yet romantic and mysterious. Remember, the Romantics loved ruins, didn't they? And ruined castles. Romanticism and Gothic literature are very closely related. And vibe. I was reading and I've said this before actually. Somebody was talking about Thomas Ligotti's work and saying, you can read a story for character, you can read it for plot, or you can read it for vibe. And his point was you read Ligotti for vibe. I think a lot of Gothic is read for vibe. And probably was in those days, but the point I was making, there are certain places like Transylvania in Dracula, Carinthia in Le Fanu's Carmilla, and Italy in Radcliffe's Italian, or Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, was considered this romantic, mysterious, slightly diabolical place. Something happened in Italy when James Wilson, great-grandfather, was he great-grandfather? was on the Grand Tour. And then we have this idea of the Renaissance. He doesn't say this, but James would have been very aware of this, of course. The Renaissance occult manuscripts and grimoires and summoning up, and the alchemists and things like that. And they had a big presence in Italy. There were English ones as well, and Scottish ones, and Irish ones, the Yellow Earl, Kildare. But, you know, there was the flavour of the occult in these mysterious parts of Europe, which, of course, many of the readers of M.R. James in the 20th century would not have been to. The readers of the ghost stories were not the aristocracy who went on the Grand Tour. You know, some of them may have read it, but the aristocrats. But mainly it was sort of middle-class people reading it who probably didn't. So there's an Italian servant, very dodgy. Something was picked up, possibly an artifact. But it seems to me that the artifact was made and his ashes interred in it. It wasn't found in Italy. But there is this hint of strange occult things happening which have tainted the soul, because, of course, to mess with the occult is to invite the devil into your house. And certainly very strongly in those days, anything to do with magic, with a K, not conjuring, but, you know, was demonic. I mean, I think practitioners of magic these days would distance themselves from that. But certainly that was the time then. And so the idea is that this ancestor went and picked up all these ideas, these foreign, newfangled ideas, the maze, but also the Temple of Friendship that he builds, which is very beautiful. But he pays a price for that. So he pays the price for the dark secret in some way. He's cursed, I think. And I think that James, of course, maddeningly doesn't, I, of course, understand it, but many people don't. And I sort of, you know, my Latin is about poor, very poor. But I get the gist often. But that one there about penetrans ad interior mortis on the globe would penetrating the interior of death. So it's something about, I think, the great-grandfather attempted to understand not just friendship through his lovely temple, but also the dark side of that, the dark side of the soul, death. I think there's a tremendous amount to be said about this. I was talking about James's story writing, wasn't I? I think his great, fantastic gift is this use of weird, and to make them genuinely unsettling. And also his pastiche of the parable, which is scary as well. Also, he's very good at descriptions, and so we're in the maze, aren't we? With its brambles and it's wet and all of this kind of stuff. We're right there with it, and we feel the discomfort of that. And then he's very good at oblique warnings, how people have intuitions that all is not right, which is Lady Wardrop. I wouldn't mind. She says she loves mazes, but I wouldn't mind if you grubbed this one up, which it's done, of course. And then, of course, the other weird thing that happens is these shrubs. That reminded me of Algernon Blackwood's The Man Whom the Trees Loved, that kind of idea. But, you know, so James is really good at the weird, putting the weird in. There's a whole bunch to say about the symbolism of the maze, and James was clearly a very intelligent and learned man, and so he may, at one level, have intended this kind of Gnostic exploration, the mysteries of the human soul, of which the maze is symbolic. We wander around in the dark on this earth, and it's even Gnostic in the sense of our task is, according to Gnosticism, is to find the spark of divinity and find our way out of this veil of darkness. So the maze can be considered to symbolize that. However, the great-grandfather did not find his way to the light. He found his way to the darkness, which of course is, and of course in Jungian terms, and Joseph Campbell as well, what we have is the dragon guards the treasure. So if you want to simplify it, and I say this, and if you ever read a book called Maps of Meaning by a guy called Jordan Peterson, who's a Canadian psychologist, I think Peterson's really good at operationalizing Jung and people like this. So some of Jung's work can be quite impenetrable for similar reasons to James. He doesn't translate his Latin and Greek and Hebrew. You have to be. He assumes you're just as smart as he is, and so Peterson talks about the dragon, and he says it's like for all organisms, even the humble bacterium, there are only two directions. One is to safety, which is away, and the emotion associated with that is anxiety, or to food and reward, which is outward, which has danger with it. If you do not risk anything, you're not going to live. But if you risk too much, you will die. So the real thing is that the dragon, or in this dark secret in the maze, is really dangerous. But if you don't go looking for it, you'll perish, you'll wither. So people who have tremendous anxiety problems find their lives are very small. They don't go out. And that is the fear of the dragon. So the secret is you have to vanquish the dragon in whatever way you can, and therefore you take the dragon's hoard. Dragons always guard hoards, and you take the treasure. And so in this story, it's like an unsuccessful treasure hunt, isn't it? In the parable, he goes again, and the dragon is demonic. The dragon's not a Smaug in Lord of the Rings is pretty nasty. The dragons were not nice. They weren't friendly. They were evil, cunning, evil, demonic things. And you have to risk that, the peril of your soul, if you like, in order to bring home the treasure. But in this case, the guy in the parable, who is not related to the James, he gets the treasure but loses his soul. And I think that's the implication for the great-grandfather. He goes to Italy, learns some occult stuff. He delves into the secrets, builds the maze to symbolize that, penetrates the mysteries of death. I think that's what he's doing. And clearly he's successful. He's got this massive estate, this beautiful, beautiful estate, which his descendant, Mr. Humphreys, sees how beautiful it is. And but he pays the price. I think we have to assume that he is the burnt-faced creature that crawls up through the map. So yeah, he paid the price, much as the guy in the parable paid the price. So I don't think. I think what the message M.R. James is saying here is, we talked about the two ways. One is away from danger, associated with anxiety, and towards danger, associated with courage. Anxiety makes you move away, courage makes you move towards. So what we have is Mr. Humphreys, who has some courage because he's very curious about going into the maze, but he has it grubbed up. So he kind of aborts his courageous venture into the world, and because of that, well, he doesn't take back the jewel. He doesn't penetrate the secrets of death like his great-grandfather perhaps did. Although he does pretty well out of it, I suppose. I suppose that's what James is saying. He gets a lovely house. He marries Lady so-and-so's daughter. Things aren't too bad. He has lovely evenings in the library. So, So what I want to say is, in summary, I think it's a very deep story that we can talk about. I think it has moments of genuine frighteningness. I sometimes wonder about his characterization of working class people as happy dolts. But that's me, as a happy dolt. But, anyway, there we are. So there's lots and lots to say. We can have a good old discussion about it, but we can't because I've run out of time. Callie's now sleeping happily. You'll be pleased to know I've got to get this published because it's got to go out tonight. The Family of the Vurdalak by Alexei Konstantinovich Tolstoy. 1815, Vienna. While the Congress had been in session, the city had attracted all the most distinguished European intellectuals, the fashion leaders of the day, and, of course, members of the highest diplomatic elite. But the Congress of Vienna was no longer in session. Royalist émigrés were preparing to return to their country chateau, hoping to stay there this time. Russian soldiers were anxiously awaiting the time when they could return to their abandoned homes, and discontented Poles, still dreaming of liberty, were wondering whether their dreams would come true back in Krakow under the protection of the precarious independence that had been arranged for them by the trio of Prince Metternich, Prince Hardenberg, and Count Nesselrode. It was as if a masked ball was coming to an end. Of the assembled guests, only a select few had stayed behind and delayed packing their bags in the hope of still finding some amusement, preferably in the company of the charming and glamorous Austrian ladies. This delightful group of people, of which I was a member, met twice a week in a chateau belonging to Madame the Dowager Princess of Schwarzenberg. It was just a few miles from the city centre, just beyond a little hamlet called Hitzing. The splendid hospitality of our hostess, as well as her amiability and intellectual brilliance, made any stay at her chateau extremely agreeable. Our mornings were spent à la promenade. We lunched all together, either at the chateau or somewhere in the grounds, and in the evenings, seated around a welcoming fireside, we amused ourselves by gossiping and telling each other stories. A rule of the house was that we should not talk about anything to do with politics. Everyone had had enough of that subject. So our tales were based either on legends from our own countries or else on our own experiences. One evening, when each of us had told a tale, and when our spirits were in that tense state which darkness and silence usually create, the Marquis d'Urfé, an elderly émigré we all loved dearly for his childish gaiety and for the piquant way in which he reminisced about his past life and good fortunes, broke the ominous silence by saying, "Your stories, gentlemen, are all out of the ordinary, of course, but it seems to me that each one lacks an essential ingredient. I mean, authenticity. For I am pretty sure that none of you has seen with his own eyes the fantastic incidents that he has just narrated, nor can he vouch for the truth of his story on his word of honor as a gentleman." We all had to agree with this, so the elderly gentleman continued after smoothing down his jabot. "As for me, gentlemen, I know only one story of this kind, but it is at once so strange, so horrible, and so authentic, that it will suffice to strike even the most jaded imaginations with terror. Having unhappily been both a witness to these strange events and a participant in them, I do not, as a rule, like to remind myself of them, but just this once I will tell the tale, provided, of course, the ladies present will permit me." Everyone agreed instantly. I must admit that a few of us glanced furtively at the long shadows which the moonlight was beginning to sketch out on the parquet floor. But soon our little circle huddled closer together, and each of us kept silent to hear the Marquis's story. Monsieur d'Urfé took a pinch of snuff, slowly inhaled it, and began as follows. "Before I start, mesdames," said d'Urfé, "I ask you to forgive me if, in the course of my story, I should find occasion to talk of my affaires de cœur more often than might be deemed appropriate for a man of my advanced years. But I assure you that they must be mentioned if you are to make full sense of my story. In any case, one can forgive an elderly man for certain lapses of this kind, surrounded as I am by such attractive young ladies. It is no fault of mine that I am tempted to imagine myself a young man again. So, without further apology, I will commence by telling you that in the year 1759, I was madly in love with the beautiful Duchesse de Gramont. This passion, which I then believed was deep and lasting, gave me no respite either by day or by night, and the Duchesse, as young girls often do, enjoyed adding to my torment by her coquetterie. So much so that in a moment of spite I determined to solicit and be granted a diplomatic mission to the Hospodar of Moldavia, who was then involved in negotiations with Versailles over matters that it would be as tedious as it would be pointless to tell you about. The day before my departure, I called on the Duchess. She received me with less mockery than usual, and could not hide her emotions as she said, "D'Urfey, you are behaving like a madman, but I know you well enough to be sure that you will never go back on the decision once taken. So I will only ask one thing of you. Accept this little cross as a token of my affection, and wear it until you return. It is a family relic which we treasure a great deal." With galanterie that was perhaps misplaced at such a moment, I kissed not the relic, but the delightful young hand which proffered it to me, and I fastened the cross around my neck. You can see it now. Since then, I have never been parted from it. I will not bore you, mesdames, with the details of my journey, nor with the observations that I made on the Hungarians and the Serbians, those poor and ignorant people who, enslaved as they were by the Turks, were brave and honest enough not to have forgotten either their dignity or their time-honored independence. It's enough for me to tell you that, having learned to speak a little Polish during my stay in Warsaw, I soon had a working knowledge of Serbian as well, for these two languages, like Russian and Bohemian, as you no doubt know very well, are only branches of one and the same root, which is known as Slavonian. Anyway, I knew enough to make myself understood. One day I arrived in a small village. The name would not interest you very much. I found those who lived in the house where I intended to stay in a state of confusion, which seemed to me all the more strange because it was a Sunday, a day when the Serbian people customarily devote themselves to different pleasures, such as dancing, arquebus shooting, wrestling, and so on. I attributed the confusion of my host to some very recent misfortune, and was about to withdraw when a man of about 30, tall and impressive to look at, came up to me and shook me by the hand. Come in, stranger," he said. "Don't let yourself be put off by our sadness. You'll understand it well enough when you know the cause." He then told me about how his old father, whose name was Gorcha, a man of wild and unmanageable temperament, had got up one morning and had taken down his long Turkish arquebus from a rack on the wall. "My children," he had said to his two sons, Georges and Pierre, "I am going to the mountains to join a band of brave fellows who are hunting that dog Ali Bek." That was the name of a Turkish brigand who had been ravaging the countryside for some time. "Wait for me patiently for 10 days, and if I do not return on the 10th, arrange for a funeral mass to be said, for by then I will have been killed. But," old Gorcha had added, looking very serious indeed, "if, may God protect you, I should return after the 10 days have passed, do not, under any circumstances, let me come in. I command you, if this should happen, to forget that I was once your father, and to pierce me through the heart with an aspen stake, whatever I might say or do, for then I would no longer be human. I would be a cursed Vurdalak, come to suck your blood." It is important at this stage to tell you, mesdames, that the Vurdalaks, the name given to vampires by Slavic peoples, are, according to local folklore, dead bodies who rise from their graves to suck the blood of the living. In this respect, they behave like all types of vampire, but they have one other characteristic which makes them even more terrifying. The Vurdalaks, mesdames, prefer to suck the blood of their closest relatives and their most intimate friends. Once dead, the victims become vampires themselves. People have claimed that entire villages in Bosnia and Hungary have been transformed into Vurdalaks in this way. The Abbé Augustin Calmet, in his strange book on apparitions, cites many horrible examples. Apparently, commissions have been appointed many times by German emperors to study alleged epidemics of vampirism. These commissions collected many eyewitness accounts, they exhumed bodies which they found to be sated with blood and ordered them to be burned in the public square after staking them through the heart. Magistrates who witnessed these executions have stated on oath that they heard blood-curdling shrieks coming from these corpses at the moment the executioner hammered his sharpened stake into their hearts. They have formal depositions to this effect, and have corroborated them with signatures and with oaths on the Holy Book. With this information as background, it should be easier for you to understand, Madame, the effect that old Gorcha's words had on his sons. Both of them went down on their bended knees and begged him to let them go in his place. But instead of replying, he had turned his back on them and had set out for the mountains, singing the refrain of an old ballad. The day I arrived in the village was the very day that Gorcha had fixed for his return, so I had no difficulty understanding why his children were so anxious. This was a good and honest family. Georges, the older of the two sons, was rugged and weather-beaten. He seemed to me a serious and decisive man. He was married with two children. His brother, Pierre, a handsome youth of about 18, looked rather less tough and appeared to be the favorite of a younger sister called Zdenka, who was a genuine Slavic beauty. In addition to the striking beauty of her features, a distant resemblance to the Duchesse de Gramont struck me especially. She had a distinctive line on her forehead, which, in all my experience, I have found only on these two people. This line did not seem particularly attractive at first glance, but became irresistible when you've seen it a few times. Perhaps I was still very naive. Perhaps this resemblance, combined with a lively and charmingly simple disposition, was really irresistible. I do not know. But I had not been talking with Zdenka for more than 2 minutes when I already felt for her an affection so tender that it threatened to become something deeper still if I stayed in the village much longer. We were all sitting together in front of the house around a table laden with cheeses and dishes of milk. Zdenka was sewing. Her sister-in-law was preparing supper for her children, who were playing in the sand. Pierre, who was doing his best to appear at ease, was whistling as he cleaned a yagatan, or long Turkish knife. Georges was leaning on the table, with his head in his hands and looking for signs of movement on the great highway. He was silent. For my part, I was profoundly affected by the general atmosphere of sadness, and, in a fit of melancholy, looked up at the evening clouds which shrouded the dying sun, and at the silhouette of a monastery which was half hidden from my view by a black pine forest. This monastery, as I subsequently discovered, had been very famous in former times, on account of a miraculous icon of the Virgin Mary, which, according to legend, had been carried away by the angels and set down on an old oak tree. But at the beginning of the previous century, the Turks had invaded this part of the country. They had butchered the monks and pillaged the monastery. Only the walls and a small chapel had survived. An old hermit continued to say Mass there. This hermit showed travellers around the ruins and gave hospitality to pilgrims who, as they walked from one place of devotion to another, liked to rest a while at the monastery of Our Lady of the Oak. As I have said, I didn't learn all this until much later, for on this particular evening, my thoughts were very far away from the archaeology of Serbia. As often happens when one allows one's imagination free rein, I was musing on past times, on the good old days of my childhood, on the beauties of France that I had left for a wild and faraway country. I was thinking about the Duchesse de Gramont, and, why not admit it, I was also thinking about several other ladies who lived at the same time as your grandmothers, the memory of whose beauty had quietly entered my thoughts in the train of the beautiful Duchesse. I had soon forgotten all about my hosts and their terrible anxiety. Suddenly Georges broke the silence. "Wife," he said, "at exactly what time did the old man set out?" "At 8 o'clock. I can clearly remember hearing the monastery bell." "Well, that's all right then," said Georges. "It cannot be more than 7:30. And he again looked for signs of movement on the great highway, which led into the dark forest. I have forgotten to tell you, madame, that when the Serbians suspect that someone has become a vampire, they avoid mentioning him by name or speaking of him directly, for they think that this would be an invitation for him to leave his tomb. So Georges, when he spoke of his father, now referred to him simply as the old man. There was a brief silence. Suddenly, one of the children started tugging on Shdenka's apron and crying, "Auntie, when will Grandpa be coming back?" The only reply he got to this untimely question was a hard slap from Georges. The child began to cry, but his little brother, who by now was surprised and frightened, wanted to know more. "Father, why are we not allowed to talk about Grandpa?" Another slap shut him up firmly. Both children now began to howl, and the whole family made a sign of the cross. Just at that moment, I heard the sound of the monastery bell. As the first chime of the 8 was ringing in our ears, we saw a human figure coming out of the darkness of the forest and approaching us. "It is he! God be praised!" cried Shdenka, her sister-in-law, and Pierre all at once. "May the good God protect us," said Georges solemnly. "How are we to know if the 10 days have passed or not?" Everyone looked at him, terror-struck. But the human form came closer and closer. It was the tall old man with a silver moustache and a pale, stern face. He was dragging himself along with the aid of a stick. The closer he got, the more shocked Georges looked. When the new arrival was a short distance from us, he stopped and stared at his family with eyes that seemed not to see. They were dull, glazed, deep sunk in their sockets. "Well, well," he said in a dead voice, "will no one get up to welcome me? What is the meaning of this silence? Can't you see I am wounded?" I saw that the old man's left side was dripping with blood. "Go and help your father," I said to Georges, "and you, Shdenka, offer him some refreshment. Look at him, he's almost collapsing from exhaustion." "Father," said Georges, going up to Gorcha, "show me your wound. I know all about such things, and I can take care of it." He was just about to take off the old man's coat when Gorcha pushed his son aside roughly and clutched at his body with both hands. "You are too clumsy," he said. "Leave me alone. Now you have hurt me." "You must be wounded in the heart," cried Georges, turning pale. "Take off your coat. Take it off. You must. I insist." The old man pulled himself up to his full height. "Take care," he said in a sepulchral voice. "If you so much as touch me, I shall curse you." Pierre rushed between Georges and his father. "Leave him alone," he said. "Can't you see he's suffering?" "Do not cross him," Georges' wife added. "You know he's never tolerated that." At that precise moment we saw a flock of sheep returning from pasture, raising a cloud of dust as it made its way towards the house. Whether the dog which was escorting the flock did not recognize its own master, or whether it had some other reason for acting as it did, as soon as it caught sight of Gorcha, it stopped dead, hackles raised, and began to howl as if it had seen a ghost. "What is wrong with that dog?" said the old man, looking more and more furious. "What's going on here? Have I become a stranger in my own house? Have 10 days spent in the mountains changed me so much that even my own dogs do not recognize me?" "Did you hear that?" said Georges to his wife. "What of it?" "He admits that 10 days have been spent." "Surely not, for he's come back to us within the appointed time." "I know what has to be done." The dog continued to howl. "I want that dog destroyed," cried Gorcha. "Well, did you hear me?" Georges made no move, but Pierre got up with tears in his eyes and grabbed his father's arquebus. He aimed at the dog, fired, and the creature rolled over in the dust. "That was my favorite dog," he said sulkily. "I don't know why father wanted it to be destroyed." "Because it deserved to be," bellowed Gorcha. "Come on now, it's cold, and I want to go inside." While all this was going on outside, Shdenka had been preparing a cordial for the old man, consisting of pears, honey, raisins laced with eau de vie, but her father pushed it aside with disgust. He seemed equally disgusted by the plate of mutton with rice that Georges offered him. Gorcha shuffled over to the fireplace, muttering gibberish from behind clenched teeth. A pine log fire crackled in the grate, and its flickering light seemed to give life to the pale, emaciated features of the old man. Without the fire's glow, his features could have been taken for those of a corpse. Shdenka sat down beside him. "Father," she said, "you do not wish to eat anything. You do not wish to rest. Perhaps you feel up to telling us about your adventures in the mountains." By suggesting that, the girl knew that she was touching her father's most sensitive spot, for the old man loved to talk of wars and adventures. A trace of a smile creased his colourless lips, although his eyes showed no animation. And as he began to stroke his daughter's beautiful blonde hair, he said, "Yes, my daughter, yes, Shdenka. I would like to tell you all about my adventures in the mountains, but that must wait for another time, for I am too tired today. I can tell you, though, that Ali Bek is dead, and that he perished by my hand. If anyone doubts my word," continued the old man, looking hard at his two sons, "here is the proof." He undid a kind of sack which was slung behind his back and pulled out a foul, bloody head, which looked about as pale as his own. We all recoiled in horror, but Gorcha gave it to Pierre. "Take it," he said, "and nail it above the door, to show all who pass by that Ali Bek is dead, and the roads are free of brigands, except, of course, for the Sultan's janissaries." Pierre was disgusted, but he obeyed. "Now I understand why that poor dog was howling," he said. "He could smell dead flesh." "Yes, he could smell dead flesh," murmured Georges. He had gone out of the room without anyone noticing him, and had returned at that moment with something in his hand, which he placed carefully against the wall. It looked to me like a sharpened stake. "Georges," said his wife, almost in a whisper, I hope you do not intend to—" "My brother," Shdenka added anxiously, "what do you mean to do?" No, surely you're not going to—" "Leave me alone," replied Georges. "I know what I have to do, and I will only do what is absolutely necessary." While all this had been going on, night had fallen, and the family went to bed in the part of the house which was separated from my room only by a narrow partition. I must admit that what I had seen that evening had made an impression on my imagination. My candle was out. The moonlight shone through a little window near my bed and cast blurred shadows on the floor and walls, rather like those we see now, mesdames, in this room. I wanted to go to sleep, but I could not. I thought this was because the moonlight was so clear, but when I looked for something to curtain the window, I could find nothing suitable. Then I overheard confused voices from the other side of the partition. I tried to make out what was being said. "Go to sleep, wife," said Georges. "And you, Pierre, and you, Shdenka. Do not worry. I'll watch over you." Georges," replied his wife, "it is I who should keep watch over you. You worked all last night, and you must be tired. In any case, I ought to be staying awake to watch over our eldest boy. You know he hasn't been well since yesterday." "Be quiet and go to sleep," said Georges. "I will keep watch for both of us." "Brother," put in Shdenka in her sweetest voice, "there's no need to keep watch at all. The father's already asleep. He seems calm and peaceful enough." "Neither of you understands what is going on," said Georges in a voice which allowed for no argument. "Go to sleep, I tell you, and let me keep watch." There followed a long silence. Soon my eyelids grew heavy, and sleep began to take possession of my senses. I thought I saw the door of my room opening slowly, and old Gorcha standing in the doorway. Actually, I did not so much see as feel his presence, as there was only darkness behind him. I felt his dead eyes trying to penetrate my deepest thoughts as they watched the movement of my breathing. One step forward, then another. Then, with extreme care, he began to walk towards me with a wolf-like motion. Finally, he leaped forward. Now, he was right beside my bed. I was absolutely terrified, but somehow managed not to move. The old man leaned over me, and his waxen face was so close to mine that I could feel his corpse-like breath. Then, with a superhuman effort, I managed to wake up, soaked in perspiration. There was nobody in my room. But, as I looked towards the window, I could distinctly see old Gorcha's face pressed against the glass from outside, staring at me with his sunken eyes. By sheer willpower, I stopped myself from crying out, and I had the presence of mind to stay lying down, just as if I'd seen nothing out of the ordinary. Luckily, the old man was only making sure that I was asleep, for he made no attempt to come in. And after staring at me long enough to satisfy himself, he moved away from the window, and I could hear his footsteps in the neighboring room. Georges was sound asleep and snoring loudly enough to wake the dead. At that moment the child coughed, and I could make out Gorcha's voice. "You are not asleep, little one?" "No, Grandpa," replied the child, "and I would so like to talk with you." "So, you would like to talk with me, would you? And what would we talk about?" "We would talk about how you fought the Turks. I would love to fight the Turks." "I thought you might, child, and I brought back a little yagatan for you. I'll give it to you tomorrow." Grandpa, give it to me now." "But little one, why didn't you talk to me about this when it was daytime?" "Because Papa wouldn't let me." "He is careful, your Papa. So, you really would like to have your little yagatan?" "Oh yes, I'd love that, but not here, for Papa might wake up." "Where then?" "If we go outside, I promise to be good and not to make any noise at all." I thought I could hear Gorcha chuckle as the child got out of bed. I didn't believe in vampires, but the nightmare had preyed on my nerves, and just in case I should have to reproach myself in the morning, I got up and banged my fist against the partition. It was enough to wake up the 7 sleepers, but there was no sign of life from the family. I threw myself against the door, determined to save the child, but it was locked from the outside, and I couldn't shift the bolts. While I was trying to force it open, I saw the old man pass by my window with the little child in his arms. "Wake up! Wake up!" I cried at the top of my voice as I shook the partition. Even then, only Georges showed any sign of movement. Where's the old man?" he murmured blearily. "Quick!" I yelled. "He's just taken away your child." With one kick, Georges broke down the door of his room, which, like mine, had been locked from the outside, and he sprinted in the direction of the dark forest. At last I succeeded in waking Pierre, his sister-in-law, and Shdenka. We all assembled in front of the house, and after a few minutes' anxious waiting, we saw Georges return from the dark forest with his son. The child had apparently passed out on the highway, but he was soon revived, and didn't seem to be any more ill than before. After questioning him, we discovered that his grandpa had not, in fact, done him any harm. They had apparently gone out to talk together on the highway, undisturbed. But once outside, the child had lost consciousness without remembering why. Gorcha himself had disappeared. As you can imagine, no one could sleep for the rest of that night. The next day, I learned that the river Danube, which cut across the highway about a quarter of a league from the village, had begun to freeze over. Drift ice now blocked my route. This often happens in these parts sometime between the end of autumn and the beginning of spring. Since the highway was expected to be blocked for some days, I could not think of leaving. In any case, even if I could have left, curiosity, as well as a more powerful emotion, would have held me back. The more I saw Zdenka, the more I felt I was falling in love with her. I am not among those, mesdames, who believe in love at first sight of the kind which novelists so often write about, but I do believe that there are occasions when love develops more quickly than is usual. Zdenka's strange beauty, her singular resemblance to the Duchesse de Gramont, the lady from whom I had fled in Paris, and who I saw again in this remote setting, dressed in a rustic costume and speaking in a musical foreign tongue, the fascinating line on her forehead, like that for which I had been prepared to kill myself at least 20 times in France. All this, combined with the incredible, mysterious situation in which I found myself, everything helped to nurture in me a passion which, in other circumstances, would perhaps have proved itself to be more vague and passing. During the course of the day, I overheard Zdenka talking to her younger brother. "What do you think of all this?" she asked. "Do you also suspect our father?" "I dare not suspect him," replied Pierre, "especially since the child insists that he came to no harm. And as for father's disappearance, you know that he never used to explain his comings and goings." "I know," said Zdenka. "All the more reason why we must think about saving him. For you know that Georges..." Yes, I know. It would be useless to talk him out of it. We can at least hide the stake. He certainly won't go out looking for another one, since there is not a single aspen tree on this side of the mountains. Yes, let's hide the stake, but don't mention it to the children, for they might chatter about it with Georges listening." "We must take care not to let that happen," said Pierre, and they went their separate ways. At nightfall, we had still discovered nothing about old Gorcha. As on the previous night, I was lying on my bed, and the moonlight again stopped me from going to sleep. When at last sleep began to confuse my thoughts, I again felt, as if by instinct, that the old man was coming towards me. I opened my eyes and saw his waxen face pressed against the window. This time I wanted to get up, but could not. All my limbs seemed to be paralyzed. After taking a good long look at me, the old man disappeared. I heard him wandering around the house and tapping gently on the window of Georges' room. The child turned over on his bed and moaned as he dreamed. After several minutes' silence, the tapping on the window resumed. Then the child groaned once again and woke up. "Is that you, Grandpa?" he asked. "It is me," replied a dead voice, "and I have brought you your little yagatan. But I dare not go outside. Papa has forbidden it." "There is no need to go outside. Just open the window and embrace me." The child got up, and I could hear him opening the window. Then, somehow finding the strength, I leaped to the foot of my bed and ran over to the partition. I struck it hard with my fist. In a few seconds, Georges was on his feet. I heard him mutter an oath. His wife screamed. In no time at all, the whole household had gathered around the lifeless child. Just as on the previous occasion, there was no sign of Gorcha. We tried carefully to revive the child, but he was very weak and breathed with difficulty. The poor little chap had no idea why he had passed out. His mother and Zdenka thought it was because of the shock of being caught talking with his grandpapa. I said nothing. However, by now the child seemed to be more calm, and everybody except Georges went back to bed. At daybreak, I overheard Georges waking his wife and whispering with her. Zdenka joined them, and I could hear both the women sobbing. The child was dead. Of the family's despair, the less said the better. Strangely enough, no one blamed the child's death on old Gorcha, at least not openly. Georges sat in silence, but his expression, always gloomy, now became terrible to behold. 2 days passed, and there was still no sign of the old man. On the night of the 3rd day, the day of the child's burial, I thought I heard footsteps all around the house, and an old man's voice which called out the name of the dead child's brother. For a split second, I also thought I saw Gorcha's face pressed against my window, but I couldn't be sure if I was imagining it or not, for the moon was veiled by cloud that night. Nevertheless, I considered it my duty to mention this apparition to Georges. He questioned the child, who replied that he had in fact heard Grandpapa calling, and had also seen him looking in through the window. Georges strictly charged his son to wake him up if the old man should appear again. All these happenings did not prevent my passion for Zdenka from developing more and more each day. In the daytime I couldn't talk to her alone. At night, the mere thought that I would shortly have to leave broke my heart. Zdenka's room was only separated from mine by a kind of corridor which led to the road on one side and the courtyard on the other. When the whole family had gone to bed, I decided to go for a short walk in the fields to ease my mind. As I walked along the corridor, I saw that Zdenka's door was slightly open. Instinctively, I stopped and listened. The rustling of her dress, a sound I knew well, made my heart pound against my chest. Then I heard her singing softly. She was singing about a Serbian king who was saying farewell to his lady before going to the war. "Oh, my young poplar," said the old king, "I am going to the war and you will forget me. The trees which grow beneath the mountain are slender and pliant, but they are nothing beside your young body. The berries of the rowan tree which sway in the wind are red, but your lips are more red than the berries of the rowan tree. And I am like an old oak stripped of leaves, and my beard is whiter than the foam of the Danube. And you will forget me, O my soul, and I will die of grief, for the enemy will not dare to kill the old king." The beautiful lady replied, "I swear to be faithful to you and never to forget you. If I should break my oath, come to me after your death and drink all my heart's blood." And the old king said, "So be it." And he set off for the war. Soon the beautiful lady forgot him. At this point, Zdenka paused, as if she were frightened to finish the ballad. I could restrain myself no longer. That voice, so sweet, so expressive, was the voice of the Duchesse de Gramont. Without pausing to think, I pushed open the door and went in. Zdenka had just taken off her knitted jacket, of a kind often worn by women in those regions. All she was wearing was a nightgown of red silk, embroidered with gold, held tight against her body by a simple, brightly coloured belt. Her fine blonde hair hung loose over her shoulders. She looked more beautiful than ever. She did not seem upset by my sudden entry, but she was confused and blushed slightly. "Oh," she said, "why have you come? What will the family think of me if we are discovered? Zdenka, my soul, do not be frightened. Everyone is asleep. Only the cricket in the grass and the mayfly in the air can hear what I have to say to you. Oh, my friend, leave me, leave me. If my brother should discover us, I am lost. Zdenka, I will not leave you until you have promised to love me forever, as the beautiful lady promised the king in your ballad. Soon I'll have to leave. Who knows when we will see each other again? Zdenka, I love you more than my soul, more than my salvation. My life's blood is yours. May I not be granted 1 hour with you in return?" "Many things can happen in an hour," said Zdenka calmly, but she did let her hand slip into mine. "You do not know my brother," she continued, beginning to tremble. "I fear he will discover us." "Calm yourself, my darling Zdenka. Your brother is exhausted from watching late into the night. He has been lulled to sleep by the wind rustling in the trees. Heavy is his sleep, long is the night, and I only ask to be granted 1 hour. Then, farewell, perhaps forever." "Oh, no, no, not forever," cried Zdenka. Then she recoiled, as if frightened by the sound of her own voice. "Oh, Zdenka, I see only you, I hear only you. I am no longer master of my own destiny. A superior strength commands my obedience. Forgive me, Zdenka." Like a madman, I clutched her closer to my heart. "You are no friend to me," she cried, tearing herself from my embrace and rushing to another part of the room. I do not know what I said to her then, for I was alarmed as she was by my own forwardness, not because such boldness had failed me in the past, far from it, but because in spite of my passion I could not help having a sincere respect for Zdenka's innocence. It is true that I had used the language of galanterie with this girl at first, a language which did not seem to displease the society ladies of the time, but I was now ashamed of these empty phrases, and renounced them when I saw that the young girl was too naive to comprehend fully what I meant by them, what you, mesdames, to judge by your suggestive smiles, have understood immediately. I stood before her, at a loss as to what to say, when suddenly she began to tremble and look towards the window, terror-struck. I followed her gaze and clearly saw the corpse-like face of Gorcha staring at us from outside. At precisely that moment, I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. I froze. It was Georges. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. Embarrassed by his tone of voice, I simply pointed towards his father, who was still staring at us through the window, but he disappeared the moment Georges turned to look at him. "I heard the old man and came to warn your sister," I stammered. Georges looked me straight in the eye, as if trying to read my innermost thoughts. Then he took me by the arm, led me to my room, and left, without a single word. The next day the family had gathered in front of the house around a table laden with jugs of milk and cakes. "Where is the child?" said Georges. "In the courtyard," replied his wife. "He's playing his favourite game, imagining that he is fighting the Turks single-handed." No sooner had she said these words than, to our amazement, we saw the tall figure of Gorcha walking slowly towards us from out of the dark forest. He sat at the table, just as he had done the day I arrived. "Father, we welcome you," murmured Georges' wife in a hoarse voice. "We welcome you, father," whispered Zdenka and Pierre in unison. "My father," said Georges, firmly turning pale. "We are waiting for you to say grace." The old man glared at him and turned away. "Yes, grace. Say it now," repeated Georges, crossing himself. "Say it this instant, or by St. George." Zdenka and her sister-in-law threw themselves at the old man's feet and begged him to say grace. "No, no, no," said the old man. "He has no right to speak to me in that way, and if he continues, I will curse him." Georges got up and rushed into the house. He returned almost immediately, looking furious. "Where is that steak?" he yelled. "Where have you hidden it?" Zdenka and Pierre looked at each other. "Corpse!" Georges shouted at the old man. "What have you done with my elder boy? Why have you killed my little child? Give me back my son, you creature of the grave!" As he said this, he became more and more pale, and his eyes began to burn with fury. The old man simply glared at him. "The steak! The steak!" yelled Georges. "Whoever has hidden it must answer for all the evils which will befall us." At this moment we heard the excited laughter of the younger child. We saw him galloping towards us on a wooden horse, or rather on a long aspen stake, shrieking the Serbian battle cry at the top of his voice. Georges' eyes lit up as he realized what was happening. He grabbed the stake from the child and threw himself at his father. The old man let out a fearful groan and began to sprint towards the dark forest as if possessed by demons. Georges raced after him across the fields, and soon they were both out of sight. It was after sunset when Georges returned to the house. He was as pale as death. His hair stood on end. He sat down by the fireside, and I could hear his teeth chattering. No one could pluck up the courage to question him. By about the time the family normally went to bed, he seemed to be more his usual self, and taking me to one side, said to me quite calmly, "My dear guest, I have been to the river. The ice is gone, the road is clear. Nothing now prevents you from leaving. There is no need," he added, glancing at Zdenka, "to take your leave of my family. Through me, my family wishes you all the happiness you could desire, and hope that you will have some happy memories of the time you have spent with us. Tomorrow at daybreak, you will find your horse saddled and your guide ready to escort you. Farewell. Think about your host from time to time, and forgive him if your stay here has not been as carefree as he would have liked." As he said this, even Georges' rough features looked almost friendly. He led me to my room and shook my hand for one last time. Then he began to tremble, and his teeth chattered as if he were suffering from the cold. Now I was alone. I had no thoughts of going to sleep, as you can imagine. Other things were on my mind. I had loved many times in my life, and I had experienced the whole range of passions, tenderness, jealousy, fury, but never, not even when I left the Duchesse de Gramont, had I felt anything like the sadness that I felt in my heart at that moment. Before sunrise, I changed into my traveling clothes, hoping to have a few words with Zdenka before I departed. But Georges was waiting for me in the hall. There was no chance of me seeing her again. I leaped into the saddle and spurred on my horse. I had made a resolution to return from Yassy via this village, and although that might be some time hence, the thought made me feel easier in my mind. It was some consolation for me to imagine in advance all the details of my return, but this pleasant reverie was soon shattered. My horse shied away from something and nearly had me out of the saddle. The animal stopped dead, dug in its forelegs, and began to snort wildly as if some danger was nearby. I looked round anxiously and saw something moving about 100 paces away. It was a wolf digging in the ground. Sensing my presence, the wolf ran away. Digging my spurs into the horse's flanks, I managed with difficulty to get him to move forward. It was then that I realized that on the spot where the wolf had been standing, there was a freshly dug grave. I seem to remember also that the end of a stake protruded a few inches out of the ground where the wolf had been digging. But, however, I do not swear to this, for I rode away from that place as fast as I could. At this point, the Marquis paused and took a pinch of snuff. "Is that the end of the story?" the ladies asked. "I'm afraid not," replied Monsieur Dufay. "What remains to be told is a very unhappy memory for me, and I would give much to cast it from my mind. My reasons for going to Yassy," he continued, "kept me there for much longer than I had expected, well over 6 months in fact. What can I say to justify my conduct during that time? It is a sad fact, but a fact nonetheless, that there are very few emotions in this life which can stand the test of time. The success of my negotiations, which were very well received in Versailles, politics, in a word, vile politics, a subject which has become so boring to us in recent times, preoccupied my thoughts and dimmed the memory of Zdenka. In addition, from the moment I arrived, the wife of the hospodar, a very beautiful lady who spoke fluent French, did me the honor of receiving my attentions, singling me out from among all the other young foreigners who were staying in Yassy. Like me, she had been brought up to believe in the principles of French galanterie. The mere thought that I should rebuff the advances of so beautiful a lady stirred up my Gallic blood. So I received her advances with courtesy, and since I was there to represent the interests and rights of France, I made a start by representing those of her husband, the hospodar, as well. When I was recalled home, I left by the same road I had ridden to Yassy. I no longer even thought about Zdenka or her family, but one evening, when I was riding in the countryside, I heard a bell ringing the 8 o'clock chime. I seemed to recognize that sound, and my guide told me that it came from a nearby monastery. I asked him the name. It was the monastery of Our Lady of the Oak. I galloped ahead, and in no time at all we had reached the monastery gate. The old hermit welcomed us and led us to his hostel. The number of pilgrims staying there put me off the idea of spending the night at the hostel, and I asked if there was any accommodation available in the village. "You can stay where you like in the village," replied the old hermit with a gloomy sigh. "Thanks to that devil Gorcha, there are plenty of empty houses." "What on earth do you mean?" I asked. "Is old Gorcha still alive?" "Oh no, he's well and truly buried with a stake through his heart. But he rose from the grave to suck the blood of Georges' little son. The child returned one night, and knocked on the door, crying that he was cold and wanted to come home. His foolish mother, although she herself had been present at his burial, did not have the strength of mind to send him back to the cemetery. So she opened the door. He threw himself at her throat and sucked away her life's blood. After she had been buried, she in turn rose from the grave to suck the blood of her second son, then the blood of her husband, and then the blood of her brother-in-law. They all went the same way. And Zdenka, oh, she went mad with grief, poor child. Do not speak to me of her. The old hermit had not really answered my question, but I did not have the heart to repeat it. He crossed himself. Vampirism is contagious, he said after a pause. Many families in the village have been afflicted by it. Many families have been completely destroyed. And if you take my advice, you will stay in my hostel tonight. For even if the Vordalaks of the village do not attack you, they will terrify you so much that your hair will have turned white before I ring the bells for the morning mass. I am only a poor and simple monk, he continued, but the generosity of passing travellers gives me enough to provide for their needs. I can offer you fresh country cheese and sweet plums which will make your mouth water. I also have some flagons of Tokay wine, which are every bit as good as those which grace the cellars of His Holiness the Patriarch. The old hermit seemed to be behaving more like an innkeeper than a poor and simple monk. I reckoned he had told me some old wives' tales about the village in order to make me feel grateful enough for his hospitality, and to show my appreciation in the usual way by giving the holy man enough to provide for the needs of passing travellers. In any case, the word terror has always had the effect on me that a battle cry has on a war horse. I would have been thoroughly ashamed of myself if I had not set out immediately to see for myself. But my guide, who was less enthusiastic about the idea, asked for my permission to stay in the hostel. This I willingly granted. It took me about half an hour to reach the village. Deserted. No lights shone through the windows. No songs were being sung. I rode past many houses that I knew, all as silent as the grave. Finally, I reached Georges. Whether I was being sentimental or just rash, I don't know. But it was there I decided to spend the night. I got off my horse and banged on the gate. Still no sign of life. I pushed the gate, and the hinges creaked eerily as it slowly opened. Then I crept into the courtyard. In one of the outhouses I found enough oats to last the night, so I left my horse tethered there, still saddled, and strode towards the main house. Although all the rooms were deserted, no doors were locked. Zdenka's room had been occupied only a few hours before. Some of her clothes were draped carelessly over the bed. A few pieces of jewellery that I had given her, including a small enamel cross from Budapest, lay on her table, sparkling in the moonlight. Even though my love for her was a thing of the past, I must admit that my heart was heavy. Nevertheless, I wrapped myself up in my cloak and stretched out on her bed. Soon I was asleep. I cannot recall everything, but I do remember that I dreamed of Zdenka, as beautiful, as simple, and as loving as she had been when I first met her. I remember also feeling ashamed of my selfishness and my inconstancy. How could I have abandoned that poor child who loved me? How could I have forgotten her? Then her image became confused with that of the Duchesse de Gramont, and I saw only one person. I threw myself at Zdenka's feet and begged her forgiveness. From the depths of my being, from the depths of my soul, came an indescribable feeling of melancholy and of joy. I lay there dreaming until I was almost awakened by a gentle musical sound, like the rustling of a cornfield in a light breeze. I heard the sweet rustling of the corn and the music of singing birds, the rushing of a waterfall and the whispering of trees. Then I realized that all these sounds were merely the swishing of a woman's dress, and I opened my eyes. There was Shadinka, standing beside my bed. The moon was shining so brightly that I could distinguish every single feature which had been so dear to me, and which my dream made me love again as if for the first time. Shadinka seemed more beautiful and somehow more mature. She was dressed as she had been when I last saw her alone, a simple nightgown of red silk, gold embroidered, and a coloured belt clinging tightly above her hips. "Shadinka," I cried, sitting up. "Is it really you, Shadinka?" "Yes, it is me," she replied in a sweet, sad voice. "It is the same Shadinka you have forgotten. Why did you not return sooner? Everything is finished now. You must leave. A moment longer and you are lost. Farewell, my friend. Farewell forever. Shadinka, you have seen so much unhappiness, they say. Come, let us talk. Let us ease your pain. Oh, my friend, you must not believe everything they say about us. But leave me now. For if you stay any longer, you are doomed. Shadinka, what are you afraid of? Can't you just grant me an hour, just 1 hour, to talk with you?" Shadinka began to tremble, and her whole being seemed to undergo a strange transformation. "Yes," she said, 1 hour. Just 1 hour. The same hour you begged of me when you came into this room and heard me singing the ballad of the old king. Is that what you meant? So be it. I will grant you 1 hour. But no, no, she cried, as if fighting her inclinations. Leave me. Go away. Leave me. Now. I tell you, fly. Fly while you still have the chance. Her features were possessed with a savage strength. I could not understand why she should be saying these things. But she was so beautiful that I determined to stay, whatever she said. At last she surrendered, sat down beside me and spoke to me of the past. She blushed as she admitted that she had fallen in love with me the moment she had set eyes on me. But little by little, I began to notice that Shadinka was not as I had remembered her. Her former timidity had given way to a strange wantonness of manner. She seemed more forward, more knowing. It dawned on me that her behavior was no longer that of the naive young girl I recalled in my dreams. Is it possible, I mused, that Shadinka was never the pure and innocent maiden that I imagined her to be? Did she simply put on an act to please her brother? Was I gulled by an affected virtue? If so, why insist that I leave? Was this perhaps a refinement of coquetry? And I thought I knew her. What did it matter? If Shadinka was not a Diana, as I thought, she began to resemble another goddess, at least as attractive, perhaps more so. By God, I preferred the role of Adonis to that of Actaeon. If this classical style that I adopted seems a little out of place, madame, remember that I have the honor to be telling you of incidents which occurred in the year of grace 1758. At that time, mythology was very fashionable, and I am trying to keep my story in period. Things have changed a lot since then, and it was not so long ago that the revolution, having overthrown both the traces of paganism and the Christian religion, erected the goddess Reason in their place. This goddess, mesdames, has never been my patron saint, least of all when I am in the presence of other goddesses, and at the time I am referring to, I was less disposed than ever to worship at her shrine. I abandoned myself passionately to Shadinka, and willingly outdid even her in the provocative game she was playing. Some time passed in sweet intimacy, until as Shadinka was amusing me by trying on various pieces of jewelry, I thought it would be a good idea to place the little enamel cross around her neck. But as I tried to do this, Shadinka recoiled sharply. "Enough of these childish games, my dearest," she said. "Let us talk about you and what is on your mind." This sudden change in Shadinka's behavior made me pause a moment and think. Looking at her more closely, I noticed that she no longer wore around her neck the cluster of tiny icons, holy relics and charms filled with incense, which Serbians are usually given as children to wear for the rest of their lives. Stenka, I asked, where are those things you used to wear around your neck? I have lost them, she replied impatiently, and hastily changed the subject. I do not know exactly why, but at that moment I began to feel a strong sense of foreboding. I wanted to leave, but Shdenka held me back. What is this? She said. You asked to be granted an hour, and here you are trying to leave after only a few minutes. Shdenka, you were right when you tried to persuade me to leave. I think I hear a noise, and I fear we will be discovered. Calm yourself, my love. Everyone is asleep. Only the cricket in the grass and the mayfly in the air can hear what I have to say. No, Shdenka, I must leave now. Stay, she implored. I love you more than my soul, more than my salvation. You once told me that your life's blood belonged to me. But your brother, Shdenka, I have a feeling he will discover us. Calm yourself, my soul. My brother had been lulled to sleep by the wind rustling in the trees. Heavy is his sleep, long is the night, and I only ask to be granted 1 hour. As she said this, Shdenka looked so ravishing that my vague sense of foreboding turned into a strong desire to remain near her. A strange, almost sensual feeling, part fear, part excitement, filled my whole being. As I began to weaken, Shdenka became more tender, and I resolved to surrender, hoping to keep up my guard. However, as I told you at the beginning, I have always overestimated my own strength of mind. And when Shdenka, who had noticed that I was holding back, suggested that we chase away the chill of the night by drinking a few glasses of the good hermit's full-blooded wine, I agreed with a readiness which made her smile. The wine had its desired effect. By the second glass, I had forgotten all about the incident of the cross and the holy relics. Shdenka, with her beautiful blonde hair falling loose over her shoulders, with her jewels sparkling in the moonlight, was quite irresistible. Abandoning all restraint, I held her tight in my arms. Then, Madame, a strange thing happened. One of those mysterious revelations that I can never hope to explain. If you had asked me then, I would have denied that such things could happen, but now I know better. As I held Shdenka tightly against my body, one of the points of the cross, which the Duchesse de Gramont gave me before I left, stuck sharply into my chest. The stab of pain that I felt affected me like a ray of light passing right through my body. Looking up at Shdenka, I saw for the first time that her features, though still beautiful, were those of a corpse, that her eyes did not see, and that her smile was the distorted grimace of a decaying skull. At the same time, I sensed in that room the putrid smell of the charnel house. The fearful truth was revealed to me in all its ugliness, and I remembered too late what the old hermit had said to me. I realized what a fearsome predicament I was in. Everything depended on my courage and my self-control. I turned away from Shdenka to hide the horror which was written on my face. It is then that I looked out of the window and saw the satanic figure of Gorcha leaning on a bloody stake and staring at me with the eyes of a hyena. Pressed against the other window were the waxen features of Georges, who at that moment looked as terrifying as his father. Both were watching my every moment, and I knew that they would pounce on me the moment I tried to escape. So I pretended not to know they were there, and with incredible self-control continued, yes, mesdames, I actually continued passionately to embrace Shdenka, just as I had done before my horrifying discovery. Meanwhile, I desperately racked my brains for some means of escape. I noticed that Gorcha and George were exchanging knowing glances with Stenka, and that they were losing patience. Then, from somewhere outside, I heard a woman shriek and the sound of children crying, like the howling of wild cats. These noises set my nerves on edge. Time to make for home, I said to myself, and the sooner the better. Turning to Stenka, I raised my voice so that her hideous family would be sure to hear me. "I'm tired, my dear child. I must go to bed and sleep for a few hours. But first I must go and see whether my horse needs feeding. I beg you to stay where you are and to wait for me, to come back." I then pressed my mouth against her cold, dead lips and left the room. I found my horse in a panic, covered with lather and crashing his hooves against the outhouse walls. He had not touched the oats, and the fearful noise he made when he saw me coming gave me gooseflesh, for I feared he would give the game away. But the vampires, who had almost certainly overheard my conversation with Stenka, did not appear to think that anything suspicious was happening. After making sure that the main gate was open, I vaulted into the saddle and dug my spurs into the horse's flanks. As I rode out of the gates, I just had time to glimpse a whole crowd gathered around the house, many of them with their faces pressed against the windows. I think it was my sudden departure which first confused them, but I cannot be sure. The only sound I could hear at the moment was the regular beat of my horse's hooves, which echoed in the night. I was just about to congratulate myself on my cunning when all of a sudden I heard a fearful noise behind me, like the sound of a hurricane roaring through the mountains. 1,000 discordant voices shrieked, moaned, and contended with one another. Then, complete silence, as if by common assent, and I heard a rhythmic stamping like a troop of foot soldiers advancing in double-quick time. I spurred on my horse until I tore into his flanks. A burning fever coursed through my veins. I was making one last effort to preserve my sanity when I heard a voice behind me which cried out, "Stop! Don't leave me, my dearest! I love you more than my soul! I love you more than my salvation! Turn back! Turn back! Your life's blood is mine!" A cold breath brushed my ear, and I sensed that Stenka had leaped onto my horse from behind. "My heart! My soul!" she cried. "I see only you. I hear only you. I am not mistress of my own destiny. A superior force commands my obedience. Forgive me, my dearest. Forgive me." Twisting her arms around me, she tried to sink her teeth into my neck and to wrench me from my horse. There was a terrible struggle. For some time I had difficulty even defending myself, but eventually I managed to grab hold of Stenka by curling one arm around her waist and knotting the other hand in her hair. Standing bolt upright in my stirrups, I threw her to the ground. Then my strength gave out completely, and I became delirious. Frenzied shapes pursued me, mad, grimacing faces. Georges and his brother Pierre ran beside the road and tried to block my way. They did not succeed, but just as I was about to give thanks, I looked over my shoulder and caught sight of old Gorcha, who was using his stake to propel himself forward, as the Tyrolean mountain men do when they leap over alpine chasms. But Gorcha did not manage to catch up with me. Then his daughter-in-law, dragging her children behind her, threw one of them to him. He caught the child on the sharpened point of his stake. Using the stake as a catapult, he slung the creature towards me with all his might. I fended off the blow, but with the true terrier instinct, the little brat sunk his teeth into my horse's neck, and I had some difficulty tearing him away. The other child was propelled towards me in the same way, but landed beyond the horse and was crushed to pulp. I do not know what happened after that, but when I regained consciousness, it was daylight, and I found myself lying near the road next to my dying horse. So ended, mesdames, a love affair which should perhaps have cured me forever of the desire to become involved in any others. Some contemporaries of your grandmother's could tell you whether I had learned my lesson or not, but, joking aside, I still shudder at the thought that if I had given in to my enemies, I would myself have become a vampire. As it was, heaven did not allow things to come to that, and so far from wishing to suck your blood, Edam, I only ask, old as I am, to be granted the privilege of shedding my own blood in your service.
Everybody dies. Everybody comes back. Isn't that so?
You've tried to get into the locked door.
So that was The Family of the Vurdalak by Alexei Nikolaevich Tolstoy. Tolstoy, I believe you might say that in Russian. I learned a bit of Russian once. It was sponsored by Ed Winter very kindly, so he has given me money to pay for my expenses in producing this. So it's his gift to you. Okay, so thanks, Ed. Now, let's get the elephants in the room out of the way first. First of all, I was reading the story and I thought, first of all, the dog gets shot. I think, oh no. As I'm reading it, I think there's a few letters coming in, a few emails. And then, and the horse gets killed. Oh no. And in between times, if you're not an animal lover, there's this guy who is an old roué, this French guy, he's with these Austrian women old enough to be his granddaughters, flirting with them and telling how he pushed into some poor young Serb lass's bedroom and then pulled her to him, and then so that was tremendous. I thought, oh no. And then of course the sexist attitude of the brother. He's got a Georges, because this was written in French, but there's a note about Georgi, it would have been in Russian, and then I didn't note what it would have been in Serbian, but it was written in French, so Georges and Pierre, which may have struck you as odd. And they are treating their sister like she is a possession. And, so I thought there's more letters. The first thing to say is, take all this up with Alexei Nikolaevich Tolstoy. He died in 1945. You may need a seance, but we're coming up to Halloween, so it's a good time of year. And you can point out to him that you were very upset about these various things. But remember also, in a also light-hearted way, that this is a story this is a channel. We do horror stories. And you should expect to be a little bit horrified. And that's why you're here. And also, if a story works, it generates strong emotion. I say this. If you felt strong emotion of any kind, fear, a little bit titillated, I don't know if anybody would have been by now, upset, whatever, outraged. Remember, outrage is the emotion of the internet. These days, the internet is an outrage generation machine. But if you felt any emotions like this, then he's done his work. Anyway, let's get to some proper stuff. So Alexei Nikolaevich Tolstoy was born in 1883. He is not the same War and Peace Tolstoy, okay? He's not him. And he's not Leo Tolstoy. So let's tell you about this guy. Alexei Nikolaevich was born in 1883 in Nikolaevsk in Russia. He was a prominent Soviet writer. Well, in fact, he was an aristocrat, and he left Russia. And then he decided, and he had a very successful life in the West, and then he decided he was going home to Russia. And rather than being thrown in the gulag by Stalin, Stalin took to him, and he became known as the Comrade Count. He hated the Bolsheviks, but then he embraced the Bolshevik cause when it served his purposes. So he wrote a lot of science fiction as well. He's distantly related to the more famous Leo Tolstoy, but he carves out his own literary path. He was from an aristocratic family. We said that. His early works were influenced by Russian symbolism, but he later shifted towards realism and historical fiction. This is not realistic, but it's historical, one might argue. Well, it is. Throughout his career, Tolstoy demonstrated remarkable versatility. His trilogy, The Road to Calvary, chronicled the tumultuous period of Russian history from 1914 to 1919, encompassing World War I and the Russian Revolution. He also wrote a book about Peter I, a historical novel about Peter the Great, and he earned several Stalin prizes. Again, some of you are now outraged. Let it be. Just let it be. So he became a respected author known as a Comrade Count. A complex legacy, they say. Let's talk about the family of the Burdalak. Let's give you some historical context first. So there was a vampire hysteria that swept through parts of Central Europe in the 18th century, particularly regions such as Serbia, Romania, Croatia. So this is a Russian writing in French. The Russian aristocrats often spoke French, and although he's an Eastern European, this is Peter the Great's country, and he's living in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So these backwaters, were considered the Balkans, Eastern Europe, served the same purpose as the Fanu's Carinthia and Bram Stoker's Transylvania. We have the modern European urban world, and then we have these mysterious, romantic, Gothic, in fact, Eastern places. So let's talk about the vampire hysteria, which was a real thing, and there were commissions of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also, as he says in the story, some of the Russian emperor, I think, or the Germans looked into it. So the hysteria, the vampire hysteria, reached its peak between 1725 and 1735, with several well-documented cases of alleged vampire activity. One of the most notorious incidents occurred in 1725 in the Serbian village of Kisilova, now Kisiljevo. A peasant named Peter, I'm going to murder these Serbian names, Peter Piotr Plogojovic, maybe, and he died, and within several weeks, several other villagers reported nightmares featuring the deceased man. When a series of unexplained deaths followed, the villagers became convinced that Plogojovic had become a vampire. 2 years later, there was another significant case in the Serbian town of Medveja, excuse me, Serbs, Arnold Paule. And Paula was a former soldier who was believed to have been attacked by a vampire during his military service in Greece. Greece is also this Balkan wildland, I think particularly because it had been under Turkish rule. All these places had been ruled by the Ottoman Turks until relatively recently, and that made them more exotic and Gothic and un-Christian, Although they remained Christian, of course, the Serbs and the Greeks and all the other Balkan people apart from the Albanians. After his death, so there were official investigations by the Austrian authorities, because it was all the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and their reports could look at the vampire corpses, described bodies in an unusually preserved state with apparent signs of fresh blood, and of course this just fueled the hysteria. So the panic, and it had these newly acquired territories after the Ottoman Wars. It reclaimed these parts of Europe for Christendom, if you like. And of course this goes on, but we've got to be aware that this was a real deal. There was later in the 19th century a vampire panic in New England, of all places. But when these stories are made, there is a historical context. Okay, so this story, the family of the Burdalak, was written in 1839 when he was in his early 20s. Written in French under the title La famille du Burdalac, fragment inédit des mémoires d'un inconnu. Butchered that as well. So an unedited fragment of the memoirs of an unknown person, of an anonymous person. This Gothic novella showcases his literary prowess at a young age. He wrote it when he was a diplomat for the Russian Empire in Frankfurt. He was doing that, and he was on a trip to France, so it was pretty cosmopolitan. It was written in French, but it first appeared in print in Russian, translated by Boleslav Markievich. The Russian version titled was Semya Vurdalaka, was published in Russian Messenger in January 1884, long after its initial composition. So it didn't see the light of day until it came out in Russian. So it was, from 1839 to 1884. The original French text remained unpublished until 1950, when it appeared in Revue des études slaves, volume 26, more than a century after its creation. So we know it features this on this diplomat, a young French diplomat, the Marquis d'Urfé. Now it's very interesting. I think John Fowles is the Magus. His hero has got this name, Durf, anglicised version. Whether John Fowles was aware of this story or it's just a coincidence, I don't know. So we have this 19th century Western European fascination with the Balkans and Southeast and Central Europe, and the Russians are in this sense part of the sophisticated urban world. There are parts of Russia which would fall within this mysterious eastern part, but I'm guessing that Tolstoy himself, in France and in Germany, saw himself very much part of this Western culture, I don't know. But it's a frame story. So, frame stories. Somebody's sitting around and they say, listen, I'll tell you a story. Famous one is The Turn of the Screw, but there's loads of them. Loads of them do them. M.R. James does them. E.F. Benson does them. It's a very common feature in this Victorian period. And the Edwardians, of course, later on. So, and he says it took place in 1759 when he's trying to titillate these young women around the fire. And he's a bit of a louche dude, isn't he, really? So the Vurdalak is a variant of the vampire myth, which was, this when we're talking about, we've just quoted the Serbian vampire stuff from the mid-18th century. Just a few years, and this is more than a few years, so we're talking about the 1720s to 1735 with the vampire hysteria, and this is set in 1759, but it was written in 100 years later, basically, in 1839. Well, not quite 100, my math isn't that bad, 80 years later. So the Vurdalak is this Balkan, this particularly Serbian variant of the vampire, or you could say the original vampire, given that Western European vampires and American vampires later, Twilight, I'm looking at you, Buffy, I'm looking at you, have their origins in Balkan myth, in the Vurdalak here. And the Greeks have versions of it as well. Like the real Serbian hysteria, that they particularly like the blood of their relatives. So there's a couple of things going on here. There's the vampire stuff. Oh, we should say, its influence can be traced. There was a 1963 film called Black Sabbath, not featuring the band, but was based partly on this story. Before we get into kind of talk a little bit more, we'll put it into we're trying to frame its context, both its real life chronological context, what's happening in the real world in terms of vampire hysteria, but also what was happening in European literature, 1839. So we know that The Vampire, John Polidori, done it on the channel if you want to listen to it, came out in 1819. The Gothic novel, the first Gothic novel, Castle of Otranto, 1765. The big explosion in Gothic stories, particularly Gothic romance, with Anne Radcliffe, is the 1790s. She was a mega star. She earned so much it would have put Mick Jagger to shame. She was the Mick Jagger and think of other, Michael Jackson if you like, maybe not Michael Jackson, of her age. Okay, so that's 1790. So Gothic is doing well. It keeps going down and pulsing up again. So we have 1719. We have The Vampire. We have Wake Not the Dead, Last die Toten ruhen, Ernst Rauppach's done it on the channel in English, 1823. So the vampire stories are keeping coming through. And then we have the proletarian James Malcolm Reiner's Varney the Vampire in the Penny Dreadfuls from 1845 to 1847. And then in French in 1836 we have Théophile Gautier's La Morte Amoureuse, The Dead in Love, or The Dead Lover really, 1836. And then there's another Alexander Dumas, The Pale Lady, La Dame Pâle, which appeared in 1849. And then we have, as it goes on, we have Carmilla, the Irish novelist Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, 1872. And then we have, of course, Dracula itself, 1897. So it's almost like the vampire novel doesn't sleep. You know, all through this period, there are vampire stories coming out. And the variants of vampires, and our idea of the vampire is kind of, we know what the vampire does: mirrors, running water, steaks, garlic, only at night, only when invited in. These things have been accreted to the vampire as time goes on, and the early vampires were had their own doody things. I mean, it doesn't stop Grandpa coming in, does it? So yeah, the Vurdalak is a variant of Vulkodolak or Vukodlak, originally referring to werewolves in South Slavic mythology, and we see this in early days. The vampire and the werewolf are they're not separate monsters as we have them now. They are closely related and variants. So, and this idea about putting a stake through the heart is a Balkan thing. Then also you should cut the head off and you should bury them at a crossroads. I don't know where those come from, but yeah, particularly we have, we've mentioned about the Eastern European versus the Western European stuff going on, sophisticated versus unsophisticated. Just saying about the story. So we have a vampire story then. We have a vampire story. And then we have a love story. And then the two come together nicely. So we have, in many horror stories, there is a sin that is in Frankenstein. We have Victor Frankenstein. His sin is hubris, and also he wants to resurrect, in some sense, his dead mother through this. He wants to rescue. He wants to beat death, doesn't he? The sin, that is the sin. In other stories, they build a house on Indian burial grounds. That's desecration, isn't it? And disrespecting the past, disrespecting the owners of the land, if you like, or the original owners of the land. And you get that in the Pallinghurst Barrow, where the owners of the land are the Bronze Age people. So there is disrespect, there's hubris. These are all sins, and they can be. We know that the sinner, in Christian tradition, his soul is open to the devil. The devil can take a sinner's soul. So it's kind of that, isn't it? And Durfey is a sinner, isn't he? He's a vulgar. He's promiscuous. He falls in love with the French countess and he leaves her, and then a day later he's going, oh yeah, you're all right, Zdenka, or Zdenka in Russian. I would have preferred Zdenka, to be fair. Zdenka sounds it's like stinker. I was aware of when I was saying that, but Zdenka, the Russian, I would have been okay with that. But apparently it may be that the Serbian is Zdenka. I don't know. Serb will have to tell me. So where was I? Yeah, so so in many cases the sinner is punished, and that is the horror. The sinner does not get away with the sin. I read Hell House by Richard Matheson recently, and they're all sinners, and they don't get away with the sin. Most of them are punished in that. It's a good book. It's a bit too racy to read out on the podcast, apart from copyright issues as well. There's bosoms in it. And heaven knows how many letters that would generate. So, yeah, so the story, yes, he's a sinner. He deserves to be punished, but he gets away with it. He even kills his horse in his really interesting story. It was well written in the sense of those two story themes coming together. The horrible, lascivious old count pimping himself, and then him almost getting his just desserts. And I think it was a modern story. The horse wouldn't have died, the dog wouldn't have died, but he would. Yeah, how about that?